Hello and welcome to the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1980 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Sissy Spacek won for her performance in Coal Miner's Daughter. But why did she beat fellow nominees Ellen Burstyn, Goldie Hawn, Mary Tyler Moore, and Gena Rowlands? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 53rd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1980. We'll be discussing how Sissy Spacek won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today, I'm so happy to have on the main show for the first time. You first heard him on this show on a bonus episode about Black Klansmen. My former colleague at Gold Derby, where he works as a senior editor. Welcome to the show, Daniel Montgomery.
Hi, happy to be here. Thank you for having me on the main show. I'm looking forward to talking about this race.
Yes, and getting us into a whole new decade.
Yes. Almost entering into the millennial period, where
It's true. Yes.
I was born 3 years after this race that we're covering.
All right. Well, before we talk this year, 1980, let's talk about Best Actress overall. So my first question for you, Daniel, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
Well, when I was thinking about this, I was going through, the list of Best Actress winners I've seen, because I'm not a completist. I haven't seen everything going back through time. But I'm gonna be super basic. I remember one time I finally got around to seeing Sophie's Choice, because Meryl Streep and Sophie's Choice for so many people is just kind of like a shorthand for this is good acting. And then I saw it and I was like thinking, yeah, they're right. Like this is kind of synonymous with good acting. I gotta say, very little beat Meryl Streep and Sophie's Choice for me when I finally saw that performance. And my expectations were high, given the reputation that film and that performance already had when I saw the film. So the fact that it met those expectations, I would put her at the top. But there are, there's so many others that I love. Vivian Leigh, Streetcar Named Desire, Faye Dunaway Network, which you discussed, Charlize Theron and Monster, which you will discuss. So yeah, like Meryl Streep is just kind of an undisputed all-timer, and it's so not a creative thing to say, but it's kind of true.
Yeah, well, I've had this discussion with my friend Juan Carlos Ohano when he did the 1961 episode. He's still the only person until you who has said Meryl and Sophie's Choice for this question. So it feels like it's weirdly become underrated to say that now. I don't know. It's strange, but
I feel maybe that performance has just gotten so much praise that it does feel like the obvious choice, that and it has such high expectations whenever people watch it at this point. So if she's not literally if you're not having literal religious experience watching her, then it's it's disappointing.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, we will be talking about that in just a few weeks, that very performance. So excited to dive into all of the work that she put into that performance. But my other question for you, we love a winner, but we also love the many people who have lost this category over the years. So who would you say is your most heartbreaking Best Actress loss of all time?
Here, my knowledge base skews much more recent, because I said, I haven't seen everything from previous seasons. So I gotta say the most heartbreaking loss, and it's kind of like a two-parter, is, in recent years has to be Saoirse Ronan, just because I feel like she was the best in her category twice, and she lost to repeat winners both times. So the time that she lost to, she was in Lady Bird. I thought she should have won for that. And it went to Frances McDormand for Three Billboards. And then she was in Little Women, which she was never quite as win competitive in the conversation. But I thought she should have had much more of an opportunity for that, going up against Renee Zellweger, who swept everything for Judy. I don't think she needed a second Oscar necessarily. McDormand would get yet another Oscar, so she didn't even need that one for Three Billboards. So Saoirse Ronan should have at least one of those, and that still bugs me.
Yeah, that is a very, very good pick. And I'm hopeful that she is still in the sweet spot of, still being in the peak of her career and actually getting that Best Actress win. I am becoming fearful that we could have an Amy Adams, Glenn Close type situation happening at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all about whether she becomes Amy Adams, like, oh, her time will come, then it never comes. Although, Amy Adams, it still could come.
Yes.
Or if she's, Kate Winslet, where it's like, oh, her time will come, then she'll do her Holocaust movie and win her Oscar for The Reader. After being campaigned in the wrong category and then moved by the Oscar voters. And,
right.
So she just needs to follow that exact same trajectory. Just do an episode of a comedy series where you joke about doing a Holocaust movie to win your Oscar, then do your Holocaust movie to win your Oscar.
That's wild. I mean, I do think she is supposed to be in Blitz, so that's like a Steve McQueen movie that is war adjacent. So who knows? We shall see. So yeah, that's a really, really good pick, and very much looking forward to covering her nominations way down the line from now. But still, just one of my favorite facts is that all 4 of her nominations so far are also in Best Picture nominees, which very rarely happens. So that's pretty cool.
Especially for women.
Exactly.
The fact that she's had those films get the recognition that they had overall, I think is a testament to her carrying.
Especially
movies.
Like Brooklyn, which wasn't a sure bet, but yeah.
Yeah, and the only one of those that was a supporting nomination was Atonement. So she really carried the other 3
her debut,
films in those nominations.
Right.
So.
Well, let us go back in time to 1980 to talk about this year's Oscars, the 53rd Academy Awards. The nominees were Ellen Burstyn in Resurrection, Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin, Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People, Gena Rowlands in Gloria, and Sissy Spacek in Coal Miner's Daughter, with the winner being Miss Sissy Spacek. So before we break down these performances, Daniel, what are your overall thoughts on binging this lineup?
We'll get into it more, but I felt like so many of these movies were like cautionary tales about, like, don't get involved with F-boys.
Yeah.
because
True.
Like there are just so many, women whose if not primary problem, significant problem is a really, really crappy romantic partner.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes it's about them overcoming. Sometimes the marriage endures despite everything. So yeah, that was my first thought going into this race. There are no like all timers for me when I watch these performances and these films, but I did have varying opinions about the different films themselves. So that'll be interesting.
For sure. Yes. I do think we have a few cases here where perhaps the performance and the actress is elevating perhaps the material that they're given. Yes.
To the extent that they are able, yes.
Yes, that's also true, because you can only do so much at a certain point. But yeah, this is a really interesting place to start with the 80s, because I feel like in some ways it feels like a bit of a leftover from the 70s in terms of the style of the films and the performances. We have a lot of familiar faces in this lineup. The only new nominee here is Mary Tyler Moore, who was already like very well established from TV. So I hadn't seen all of these performances in films before this week. I'd seen Coal Miner's Daughter, Ordinary People, and Private Benjamin. Hadn't seen Resurrection or Gloria. But from my own understanding, this was one of those lineups, kind of like 1979, the year that we just talked about, where it's kind of like there were 2 top contenders for the win, like well out in front, and then 3 kind of also rans, for lack of a better word, kind of also similar to like the Cate Blanchett, Michelle Yeoh face-off that we just had. But I do think personally that all of these performances are good to great, and just such wildly different films and tones and styles. But I find all of them, just as actresses individually, so accomplished that, like you're sort of already alluding to, they do sort of propel the film forward, even if the writing is not always the greatest. But yeah, I do think it's a good bridge from the 70s and the sort of grittiness there with the more studio friendly 80s, I guess, that we're going to get in this category. So yeah, excited to break this down. And again, like it feels like all five of these films are like so wildly different from each other that it really is like
Yeah.
apples and oranges and every other fruit.
In incredibly different, you've got your traditional biopic here, you've got you've got your woman with healing powers over here, which,
Of
having never
course.
seen Resurrection, I'm like, oh, is that what this is about?
That is,
um
yeah. Got our wacky studio comedy kind of,
yeah,
we have our devastating family drama. And then there's
absolutely. Yeah,
Gloria, which is its own thing.
it's
So,
very much its own thing. Yeah.
yes. Alrighty, so let's get right into it, starting with Miss Ellen Burstyn for Resurrection. So, this is the sort of end of a very strong run for Ellen Burstyn, where she was getting nominated pretty much every other year, starting with The Last Picture Show, then The Exorcist. She wins for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Then there was Same Time Next Year, and now Resurrection. Like 5 Oscar nominations in 10 years is pretty impressive. Of course, this won't be the last time that we'll talk about Miss Burstyn, because Requiem for a Dream is coming in about 20 years, exactly 20 years actually, which I'm very much looking forward to breaking that one down. But this is, yeah, sort of the end of an era for Ellen at the Oscars at this time of her really sort of getting these prime leading actress roles and very in demand as just like one of those powerhouse actresses. And some of that in demand status that she had sort of extended to her being able to actually express herself behind the scenes as well, where she was very active in helping to shape this film, Resurrection, as she kind of was with Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore too. But at first, apparently Resurrection was pitched to her as, what if Jesus came back as a woman? That was like the elevator pitch to her, which she was not super into. But then she sort of molded that a little bit to this other idea, and to sort of build on top of that, where she was like very interested in Eastern religion and, interested in these stories about people who had gone through near-death experiences. So she talks about all this in her memoir, which I was reading this week, and just how involved she was in shaping this, and how the studio was much more interested in Ellen's version of the story. So the screenwriter basically just wrote it based off of her idea. And unfortunately, she was not credited for like the story here, or even as a producer credit, which she said she regrets not fighting for that. But suffice to say, she was very involved with figuring out the concept here. So the film is about a Midwestern woman, Edna May, played by Ellen, who gets in a car accident, and that kills her husband and briefly kills her as well. And she sees some kind of afterlife vision and comes back to life. So then she goes back to her hometown, where she discovers that she has these newfound healing powers, where she's able to treat certain sick people just by making the like physical contact with them and sort of giving them some motherly love. So she becomes a bit of a minor celebrity in her hometown. Meanwhile, this local guy starts to romance her, but then he becomes angry at her for not like attributing her gift to Western religion and Jesus. So yeah, this is an interesting one to unpack, I think. I do feel like this is one of Ellen Burstyn's lesser seen Oscar nominations. Maybe I'm wrong, but again, I personally hadn't seen it before this week. What are your thoughts on the great Ellen Burstyn overall and this somewhat unusual film?
I love Ellen Burstyn overall. Looking through her Oscar history, again, like I said, I have not like caught up with everything that everyone has ever done in Oscar
Yeah.
history. I have actually seen most of her performances, and this
Mm-hmm.
was not one of them until watching it for this. she's good. She's the best thing
Mhm.
about the film.
Sure.
I don't think the film, personally, I don't think it works.
Okay.
It just
Yeah.
it her husband dies, and like you don't really get a sense of that mourning process from her, because it goes straight into her healing abilities, and then she
Mhm.
meets this man who got stabbed in a bar fight, and she's romancing him for some reason, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why why him, not him.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
I turned out to have been right.
Mhm.
um
Yeah,
like I
your
said,
instincts were correct.
she'll be one of many, she'll be one of multiple women in this category, who needs to leave her partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
um Her performance is good. Like, one of the things that I noticed about her performance, she'll have this great scene at her father's bedside where
Mm.
she's talking about all of the reasons that they've been estranged and their family has been kind of fractured, and she's sort of narrating this whole thing, even though we didn't really get much of a sense of it before or after.
Yeah.
So it's just like the script is just like, okay, here's all the ways your father has been crap to you. Make it work.
A
And
lot of telling, not showing there.
a
Yeah.
lot of telling, not showing.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things. Like, the screenplay doesn't really feel like it's cause and effect in any sort of way. Like, everything seems to just kind of happen. And then at the end, she's at a gas station for, again, why is she suddenly running this gas station with the corpse of this two-headed snake? And
Yeah, I
it's
know.
just sort of baffling. I think all of that gets in the way of her performance. And as I was watching this, I was thinking, okay, she must have been like on one of those hot streaks. She must have been on a high to have gotten this to an Oscar nomination.
Mhm.
Um, like one of those streaks where it's just like you look back and go like, for that, really? And
Mm.
it's just because
Yeah.
when you're hot, you're hot. And so again, Ellen Burstyn, not undeserving of a nomination personally for this performance necessarily, but
Mhm.
I don't think the film really does her any favors with it.
Yeah, you wish it was for better material, I think. Because
Especially
I
with
do
the
think
subject matter. I think it's
yeah,
interesting subject
yeah,
matter. This woman who develops healing abilities, but she doesn't attribute it to, for religious reasons.
right.
So you could have done really interesting things with that. I just don't think that they ever really did.
Right. Yeah, I do think she is able to find some humanity in it. You can tell that she's passionate about the film and sort of like what it might mean and like represent for people as this kind of like a, a different kind of healing process. I sort of want to be careful with what I say here because Ellen makes this distinction in her memoir too that this isn't sort of like a rejection of Western medicine, right? And it's kind of like the spiritual woo woo sort of thing. But it is sort of representing for her like the power of human connection and physical connection and also spiritual connection, all kind of interlinked as this sort of path to healing, not as like this end all be all solution, but as something that can like at the very least just help people along. And whether you believe in that part of it or not, I do think you can feel the sort of sincerity and the conviction of what Ellen believes sort of being communicated through the performance. So yeah, I mean, I think generally Ellen Burstyn has always been very good at just playing these sort of everyday women who like they can't really be categorized as one archetype or another, but there's always like a centered quality for me and a groundedness and just this sense that for me I just find her characters to be easy to root for or at least empathize with. So I mean, like, I feel like from the beginning she does just have that grounded naturalistic presence even before what happens to her. My issue with the film is that it just trends into being about her healing powers and we don't really sort of like check in on how she's feeling about all of it very much,
Yeah,
and I think that does limit her ability to really give like a super well-rounded performance, you know.
yeah, it's really kind of all over the place in that sense, where you get this whole first segment of the film where she's with her husband. You see they have a passionate relationship. She gets him a car. They she's
Yeah.
worked really hard for this marriage and to make him happy, and then all of a sudden, whoops, drive off a cliff. And then the husband not only dies but kind of disappears as a relevant subject of the film.
I know.
Like one of the reasons I thought that the relationship with her and Sam Shepard as Cal didn't work is because I didn't really see how we progressed from her in this marriage and having this terrible loss to her suddenly being like, yeah, sure, let's go for it, and pursue this relationship with a guy who clearly is already not the best guy. When she meets him, she's healing him from a stab wound from a bar fight. So like, why?
Great first impression. Yeah.
Great first impression. Like he seems like marriage material, clearly, right there off the bat. And so it just feels like, well, we don't get enough of a chance to see her processing what she's going through, and it just feels like the script is interested in posing the question of the faith of is this a natural ability, is this from a religious source, and it's so preoccupied with that we don't really get enough of the personal from her, except in these bits and pieces where, like I said, she's at her father's bedside and she's explaining things that the script should have been kind of conveying in like throughout the film in a more nuanced and lived in kind of way.
Yeah, it just feels like at a certain point it becomes more about other characters and how they're feeling compared to her. Like, it's still a really strong showcase for her and a compelling role on paper. Like, you could see why she would be so interested in it, but there are definitely parts where it feels like either like things are rushed or just papered over, or like scenes were cut down or cut out. I don't know. And also the romance does feel very off to me, so that definitely affects things too. So I feel like she does sort of come out of it unscathed despite some of that. But another part I'm interested in kind of exploring is what we think the overall message of the film is. Like, what are we supposed to take from this, and whether Ellen herself is kind of successful in getting us there, like, emotionally.
I had that same question, and I don't know that I have a good answer for what the film gives us. It sort of brings me back to that ending. Like, that ending is so representative, I think, of the issues I had with the film. It's just like, we flash forward 2 years later. She's running this gas station. We don't know how she got this gas station. We don't know why she's running it. Why, like, she left town after her boy toy tries to assassinate her, to bring out her Jesus or something. I don't know, like that. Yeah. That's a little
very also muddled. Yeah.
And like, suddenly she's at this gas station, and it felt like, okay, the film felt like it needed like this button at the end to kind of like show where she is. And it's like, well, why is she there? Why did she choose to be there? What decisions did she make to get there? And it just feels really arbitrary. It's like she hugs, this kid and cures, theoretically cures their cancer. We don't follow this child after she lays on of hands. So, to know if it worked on this child, but it just felt like, and then it just stops. Like, it's just like, okay.
And then it literally stops like on a freeze frame.
Yeah.
For some reason. I don't know what that's all about, but yeah.
And I feel like the film is sort of tricking us, or trying to trick us into feeling something profound there. It's like thinking, okay. And I'm just like, okay.
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 Right.
Credits roll. And I'm just like, I do not know what the film was ultimately trying to say at the end there.
Yeah. Also, just as a quick side note, does it ever take you out a little bit when you're watching like an older movie and you're seeing someone portraying themselves at an older age? And then you think about like how they are still acting today and how they look a little bit different than how they are portrayed in that older age in the past. I don't know. For some reason, that always like takes me out a little bit.
Yeah, it's always fascinating. It's like the old version of those TikTok filters where, they show you how you look as an old person. The TikTok filters are usually more accurate than the makeup from older films, aging then younger actors into older versions of themselves. We didn't have the technology then,
Yeah.
and now we do. Yeah, it is interesting. I'm always, as an elder millennial,
Hmm.
pushing 40. I'm always interested in seeing films where actors who I know of as quote unquote older actors were around my age or a little older, a little younger. I'm like thinking,
Right.
how are you ever my age? You're older than me. So that's always, and that's one of those fun time capsule sort of things about going back and looking at these old performances in general.
Yes, exactly. I'm not sure like how much older she's supposed to be by this point, but she has like this long gray hair. I do appreciate that they didn't totally do like a Beautiful Mind kind of like Jennifer Connelly thing with her, where it's like, oh no, what have we done to this actress? But yeah, anyway. But I do think overall she does get some strong showcase scenes, especially towards the beginning, more so for me. I don't know if you would agree with that, where I feel like she kind of tapers off by the end in terms of giving her those big moments. Like, I think the scene in the hospital bed, like towards the very beginning, where after the car accidents happened and she's like sort of processing what led her to this place and her grief over losing her husband and her just sort of feeling like, what am I going to do now? I do think she performs that sort of mix of emotion in a pretty vulnerable way, pretty open, and also like that hint of bitterness when her father comes, and you can tell that they have some weird energy in a past, and like her talking to her husband's grave after that, like it's, even though we've barely gotten to know this woman, I do think she is able to just make you care about her just because of how opened up she is already, and I think some of that is her own, training in the method, which she was very much invested in at this time. You can really like tell that she has immersed herself in this character already. And I also think her scenes with her grandmother are really natural and well played, with Eva Le Gallienne, who is this older stage actress. This is her one of her only films, and she gets a supporting actress nomination here. I think it's very fitting for me because of the nature of the film and like her Edna's healing powers, that there is like this very nice sort of energy flow going on between the two of them, where I feel like we're almost seeing Edna kind of going back into that younger version of herself, where when she's around her grandmother and she's allowed to be a little more childlike and open, but also not really coming across as like childish because she's very much a grown woman by this point. So I think for me, it's a performance in a film where she gets a lot to do in the first half, and then my interest starts to taper off as we get into the Sam Shepard romance.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, it just feels like we're so invested in her and her journey, and then it kind of like forgets about her a little bit towards the end.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, in that first half, what makes it so impactful is that, we are watching her process these things. We are getting a chance to
Right.
see her, following the death of her husband, and having to move back with her family. I wish we would have actually seen more with her and her grandmother, because I do
Yeah.
think, they have nice scenes together, and it's a little not enough for me to really like understand what their connection is. Like they have this really lovely farewell scene where her grandmother's like,
Mhm.
I want our goodbye to be private, and it's like that would be more meaningful if you had had more scenes together to
Yeah.
understand what you two mean to each other.
Hmm.
um and then you're right, like when the Sam Shepard stuff starts, that's when it kind of loses me a little bit, because I didn't really buy that relationship. It sort of takes us away from what I would have liked to see explored a lot more, which is her grief over her husband. Like, maybe does she feel some guilt over her husband's death because he died in the car that she bought for him?
Yeah.
We don't really get any of that processing once she starts healing people and becomes involved with this soon to be fanatical man.
Yeah, I think the film sort of is trying to show that just in her inability to like really get there with Sam Shepard for a little while. Like it takes a little time for them to actually consummate, I suppose, for lack of a better word. Um just I feel like they're sort of trying to show when she is being very quiet and sort of just reserved that she is still feeling a certain way about it. But I do kind of agree that it doesn't really effectively do that. Like, I can see, for me, it's all like in the on paper, everything sort of is making sense, but just in the execution, there's for some reason something is off. And I do think the chemistry between the two of them doesn't really work very much. I don't
No,
really
I
buy
agree.
that they would be interested in each other, like, from either direction, to be honest. So that's not great. But I do think, like, the scenes of her actually healing, which I think we should also talk about, are pretty compelling. Like, I do think, like, the ones towards the end, like when she's in that sort of, I don't know, barn area, where the woman played by Madeline Sherwood, who was in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, so glad to see her again. I think that's a really good sort of healing scene where you do feel the emotion flowing through the characters. And then the one after that with the woman who has the dystonia, I think, is the most effective, and you really are feeling like the physical toll that it takes on Edna. And because of how I think Ellen is just like fully committed to bringing this sort of overflowing of emotion. So I was curious what your take was on the healing scenes.
The healing scenes are good. Like the what Ellen Burstyn is doing in those scenes. She's there's a sort of stillness to her, like a
Yeah,
calmness to her.
right.
That she's sort of, she seems like this steady presence for these people who she's healing. And then she cures the woman with dystonia, and she starts to feel, especially a lot of distress from that. And it makes me think more like, what would this film have been if you cut out the Sam Shepard character overall, like entirely? Like, you might get more interesting bits about her in the process of healing, her reconciling that with faith. Instead she just seems to, be this steady, confident presence where she's like, oh yeah, I can heal people. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. Anyway, go about your day.
Right.
Um, so like, yeah, like, and all the time we get with Sam Shepard, I feel like if we lose all of that, how much more do you get to actually invest in Edna?
And that's another thing that Ellen talks about, is that it was actually important for her to have Edna also be like a sexual being, because she didn't want it to be like, oh, here's this like mystical woman who is kind of like sexless, and she's just like this sort of symbolic character almost. Like, she wanted her to be like a flesh and blood human. Like, and I think that's part of why she really was into the Sam Shepard stuff in the story. Again, it just, like, in execution, it doesn't really pay off, unfortunately. So I do agree. And at the same time, it also feels kind of like studio notes. Like, we need like a romance here sort of thing.
Yeah, it feels like so often you see that with female characters. A lot of times I'm often very skeptical of women in films being like given a love interest sometimes, because I feel like we see so often that a woman in a film has to be defined by her relationship to a man.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you got to really earn it for me if you're telling a story about this woman under these extraordinary circumstances, and then you give her a love interest. And yeah, I don't think this film really ever kind of earns that presence, or makes it part of what she has to overcome enough to justify having him be a character in the film.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to put too much of that on Ellen and her performance, but I do think the frequency there is off enough that that's why I don't feel like this is a perfect performance or really her best nomination by any means. I'm not fully blown away by the performance, just because for as much of a star vehicle as it is set up to be, I do just ultimately find a little bit of distance from the character that I don't know if it's the script or her or both. I'm kind of in this weird sort of middle place here where, I was definitely expecting this to be pretty silly and hokey just based on the premise. And some of that is there, like some of the special effects that we get in the sort of afterlife are interesting. Um, but I do think she does get at something pretty human and natural. And I think a lot of that is just coming from her investment in the material. And if she wasn't into it as much, I think you could tell. So another solid showcase for Ellen. Not really close to win worthy for me, but
Same.
I don't hate it. It's not one of the worst of all time in this category by any means.
Oh no, like worst performances have won this category. Yeah,
Exactly.
so like and she's Ellen Burstyn. You never expect her to give a bad performance, and she certainly does not give a bad performance here.
Right.
It's just that when you look back on her career, I don't think Resurrection is going to be remembered as one of her key achievements of
Right.
in her career.
Right. Although she does say in her memoir that people have come up to her saying they watched Resurrection and it like changed their life. So maybe it is an important film for some people. I don't know how seen it is ultimately, but yeah, could be an interesting one to remake down the line. I don't know.
Yeah, I always like the idea of, because too many times when we see remakes of films, they're of like films that
Classics.
were classics, beloved,
Right.
perfect movies. I would
Right.
much rather see, a film where it's like, okay, this was an interesting idea. It was, not necessarily executed as well as it could have been. Let's
Right.
see if we can bring something new or different to it.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen in Hollywood, because Hollywood is all about replicating success and not like,
Mm-hmm.
trying to revise a film that, could have used some tweaks.
Right.
But I think it would be a fascinating exercise to see a version of this story told now.
Yeah, for sure. And this feels like a maybe good place to talk about this here is that the film release was not particularly strong with the studio. There's probably a better way of phrasing that, but basically the film was released very limited and not really given its proper due once she did get the nomination for it. Like it was in one theater in New York apparently, and they totally removed it from Los Angeles because it was the same studio as Coal Miner's Daughter. And so, kind of an easy choice between the two when it comes to certainly financial success and a movie that could be a 4-quadrant hit in the case of Coal Miner's Daughter compared to this like wonky, almost sci-fi-ish actress character piece that's not really like you can't really define it exactly what it is. So yeah, and she is a little bit bitter about that. She has said in her memoir as well that she was not happy with the fact that the studio was not properly promoting it, especially after she got the nomination, which is
Yeah,
fair.
you see that a lot nowadays. Not so much with this degree of burying a film to support
Yeah,
another one, but like you'll see it like nowadays with Netflix. Like they'll have 10 projects, and they'll have like 2 or 3 priorities at the most.
yeah,
And then everything else just kind of falls away, but at least you can still stream them. They don't just like pull them
that's
away
true.
from audiences so that they can support one of their other films.
Right.
Yeah, I do think the film, as much as I don't think the film works overall, I think any film deserves better than to kind of be sabotaged in the way this was.
Yep. Well, moving from that to a hit, Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin. So, Goldie Hawn is an actress who hasn't really come up on the show very much because this is her one and only Best Actress nomination, but she was a very well liked presence in Hollywood in the prior decades. She won Best Supporting Actress in 1969 for Cactus Flower, and she went on to star in films like The Sugarland Express, Butterflies Are Free, Shampoo, and she was kind of a go-to star for directors who wanted like a bubbly, sort of effervescent actress, and sometimes typecast as like a dumb blonde, which this slightly plays into as well. But she was also a co-host of the Oscars at one point in the 70s, so she was really part of the club. But Private Benjamin really cemented her as a true movie star who could carry her own films. She was a producer on the film and involved even before a script was written, which this was written by the great Nancy Meyers, her first credit here, and her husband, Charles Shire. It's about a sheltered woman named Judy Benjamin, played by Goldie, whose marriage is short-lived when her husband dies. Once again, another husband death here. This time it's during sex on their wedding night. So she's kind of adrift after that and ends up being sort of conned into joining the army to find her purpose. And during basic training, she realizes that it wasn't exactly what she was expecting, but she tries to push through anyway and sort of grows up and evolves as a person, and eventually is getting into this relationship with this French man that takes different shape over time. So let's talk Miss Goldie Hawn. What are your thoughts on another actress who's had a long career here, Goldie Hawn, and her star vehicle here in Private Benjamin?
Well, just in hindsight, before I'd seen these films, it's always nice when you see a broad comedy
Yes.
in a best anything lineup at the Oscars. Like, it feels very refreshing. At the same time, this was not the movie I was expecting it to be. I thought it would actually be a lot broader, like this kind of fish out of water, which it is. This fish out
Yeah.
of water comedy about this woman who is privileged and she ends up in the army. Like, I found her to be more reasonable than I expected her to be, even in those army scenes. Like, she's this woman who has endured trauma. Like, her husband died on their wedding night when they were in the throes of passion, and then she is flat out lied to by this army recruiter about what this experience is, as she's at her most vulnerable. And then her father completely disrespects her and does not treat her like as any kind of woman worthy of respect, just because he
Right.
thinks of her as dumb. He thinks of her as spoiled. And so, like, I'm just watching this film, it's like, this poor woman, there's more trauma in this movie than I expected there to be. I haven't even
Yeah,
mentioned
fair.
the attempted sexual assault. And she is enduring all of this, and it becomes this story of self-actualization that I hadn't expected it to be, because she's enduring all of these things that either she's been lied about, or things that happen to her that are not her fault. And so, like, I really, like, thought this was like a more nuanced character study than I was expecting it.
Hmm.
And Goldie Hawn is really, really excellent in it. Like, I don't think I had high expectations for this going into it. And it turns out to be this really nuanced take on this woman trying to learn that she's not as dumb or as incapable as the people around her are trying to convince her she is. And
Yeah.
so I really liked this film, and I really liked this performance in a way that I was not quite expecting to. And it's one of those movie star comedy vehicles that you don't necessarily always get coming to the Oscars. But she really does great work with this material. I was really pleasantly surprised by this
I'm glad. I really like Goldie Hawn a lot. I think she's such a fun screen presence, like such a gifted comedic actress, especially her work in the 90s, like, First Wives Club, Death Becomes Her. I love that she always just goes for it. Like, and she has this sort of plucky quality that I think is really fun, especially when she's utilized well, like she is in this. And yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those top tier Goldie Hawn performances that, people remember and look back on with fondness for a reason. And it was this great launching pad for her. I mean, this is another one where I don't always love the movie itself, but she's so locked in, like so in the pocket of who this character is. Like, in the beginning, she has that classic, like, sunshiny Goldie Hawn thing, very effervescent, spoiled and girly and everything you sort of expect from a Goldie Hawn sort of like rom-com performance. So nothing really new there. But then when she has her husband die, she gets so much to do, and she's fantastic. Just one aside for the beginning here, the reference that she makes to an unmarried woman when she's crying on the phone and talking about an unmarried woman and being like, "I didn't get it," is so funny, just in her line delivery, and also just like that makes so much sense for that character because she has never been alone in her life, and she's like, "I don't understand why this woman would be just like wanting to chart her own sort of independent path." When, ironically, as you said, this really is like kind of exactly like an unmarried woman and being a story about self-actualizing for this woman.
Yeah, and it's weird. The parallel between this and Resurrection is that it's another widow to F boy pipeline that she's in, where but in this case I feel like I understood how she ends up in this
No, I
later
agree.
bad relationship much
Yeah.
better than I understood Ellen Burstyn's relationship with Sam Shepard.
Yeah.
It feels very much like part of who this woman is and who she is gradually learning not to be. So I felt like, in a weird way, Private Benjamin gets the character stuff right in a way that the more quote unquote serious movie doesn't quite do. So it showed much more maturity in storytelling and performance than I was expecting.
I think that's the Nancy Meyers touch. She does that a lot in her films, just saying. Yeah, I just think her sort of expressiveness, like just even her facial reactions, like she's so versatile as a comedic actress and sometimes is playing into her own kind of dumb blonde stereotype and just owning it. And then also, like you're saying, sort of giving it a depth too. Like she just leans into it so much. Like when she's like, "Is there another color other than green?" when she's at basic, and it's just she's able to find the comedy in it, but not indicate too much in an obvious way. Like she's just sort of being herself. And when she tells Eileen Brennan at one point, like she signed up for a different army, the one with the condos, like she's just so funny, but in an endearing way, not in a way where you're like, this is just dumb and like implausible. Like, how does this person function in the world? Like, you actually do believe her, you know?
Yeah, she never condescends to Judy,
Right.
which
Exactly.
is a tough thing to do in a comedy like this, where a lot of the humor is sort of at her expense, because
Right.
she's in basic training, she doesn't know what she's doing, she's out of her depth, or at least that she feels that way at first, but at the same time, she's not playing so into the dumb blonde that she makes us like root against her.
Right.
She's always sympathetic. She's walking this fine line between she's a little ditzy, but she's smarter than she's given credit for. It's a very tough tightrope walk that she's actually doing in this film. To make this character work and to make the character appeal to the audience without us losing patience with her or disrespecting her the way her father disrespects her. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
fully on her side throughout. And I think that a lot of that comes down to Goldie Hawn's performance.
Yeah. And I just find that she gets so many winning moments here, even if some of it is like laughing at the circumstances of what she's going through. Like another great line, like I just wrote down a lot of lines for this because there's so many great little one-liners, where she's trying to like escape over the fence and the Eileen Brennan character is like, "You are not fit to wear that uniform," and her response is just like, "No shit."
And the
Like
perfect
that moment
response.
of self-awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, the absolute like and again that like goes to show like how much more reasonable this character is than she maybe is
Right.
on paper. It's like
Yeah.
she's trying to leave the army because she literally did sign up to a different army because the one that was sold to her is completely like alien to the one she ended up in.
Right.
And she's trying to leave because she knows she doesn't belong there. She has the self-awareness to try to escape the situation that's not right for her, or at least at the time.
Right.
And so yeah, like that moment is one of those moments where you're totally with her because yeah, she knows she no shit.
Right.
And it's just such this great matter of factness, great matter of fact
Mm-hmm.
line and delivery that's just such a huge part of what Goldie Hawn brings to this role in terms of us that sense of intelligence that she's not given credit for.
Right. And I do think she also earns what happens after that, where her parents come and they sort of chastise her. And she's like, "You know what? I am going to stay and like try this out for a while." And I think she earns that moment because, the family she would be going back to is clearly not very supportive of her. And at least here she can sort of finally assert some independence and take control of her life a little bit. And like if she really sees this out, and I think part of that is just like proving them wrong. And she doesn't want to be seen as like a failure. Like that's one of those like plot turns where she's like, actually, yes, I am going to do this, even though I don't belong here. That it makes sense story-wise because of how she is playing it, and just like the way she processes when her parents are there and saying these things to her, and she's like, screw it, I'm just gonna do it, and
Yeah.
you're on her side.
Yeah, and she has to make us believe in that moment that, you know, she would make this decision, and this decision is a believable decision for her to make. And
Exactly.
it's in so much of in her reaction, like in what she's doing in that scene, reacting to her father especially. You get the sense of the light bulb going off in her head, like, oh, this is how I've been treated, this is how I've been seen, particularly by her father, but also she's been like in relationships all her life, so she has been defined by these men and what they think of her. Like, it's just this moment where the light bulb goes off, like, oh, I need to pivot from that.
Right.
And it's, you know, one of those moments where you respect her for making the offbeat decision, because you know what it means to her and what she's been through.
Yeah, and I think also just so much of what she goes through in the basic training is just really, really fun stuff. You, again, are feeling that sense of pride when she does finally start to succeed and like get the hang of it, essentially. I am curious what we think about what happens after that with the plot line with Henri, this French doctor who she meets when they're on leave. I don't love it personally, even though, like you said, I do also agree that I feel like this makes more sense than the resurrection romance. I just personally think the film is stronger when it's just her on her own or just with the other women in the army. Like, that feels like something is clicking a little more for me there than when the film sort of takes that detour into being about romance again.
I actually like the detour. I feel like her in the army is establishing this woman, who is changing, who is trying to process all of this trauma, the death of a husband, a demeaning, you know, degrading father, and then what we get in that second half with Armand Assante, you know, who, you know, never trust a man who yells at his dog. Is like,
That's true.
that's the clear that's a clear moment where it's like, this romance is not going to work out. He yells at his
That's a deal
dog. This
breaker,
is not
ladies.
okay.
Yeah.
But like, what works for me about that segment of the film is that it shows her when she gets the opportunity to be the woman that she was going to be,
Yeah.
before the army changed her, like what happens to her. And so she has the opportunity to, again, revert control to a man, and to defer to a man, and to become this, you know, kept woman, this trophy woman, as opposed to being her own woman. And we get from that segment of the film what she has learned through the basic training, that, you know, even when she tries to go back and fit into this mold that she was once very comfortable in, it ultimately, you know, she's chafing against it. It's not like he wants her to give away too much of her independence, and she's moved on from that. So I actually really liked that second half, maybe even better than the first half. That might be an
Wow.
unconventional opinion, to have, because I feel like that's when we see the growth that she has achieved throughout the film, is when she is put back into this position when she could go back to her old
Yeah.
ways. So like, especially like the wedding scene, where again, we're seeing her react, to these things, and you know, to react to what's happening to her, react to the men around her,
Mm.
and realize that she's moved on. She's kind of evolved beyond it. Yeah. So yeah, I really liked where this film went, and that's sort of what surprised me about the film and made me appreciate it more than I think I was expecting to. So, maybe an unpopular opinion, I like the second.
No, that's very well reasoned, you know, and I do like what it represents thematically. I just think on a filmmaking level, it feels like it sort of is slowing down a little too much compared to just how much, like, it feels like the first half just flies by, you know, and then it feels like we're a little bit bogged down in the Henri stuff for me. But for her performance, I do think it does represent an evolution too, and how she's matured. Like, she doesn't seem as flighty as she was in the beginning, and we're seeing how she has become a more grounded person, and it's this great subtle shift that Goldie makes in her performance, especially like the moment where she just like shakes hands with him after they go to bed together, and there's just like more of a seriousness, I think, in her tone, and a confidence too in her being like, in that first initial scene with Henri being like, look, this was fun, now I'm gonna go, because I have responsibilities. And then all this stuff with like the thorn birds, I think, is really compelling for her, where she's like once again placed in this point of being like out of her depth in a way, and her having to deal with this very aggressive captain who's trying to force himself on her. I love how she literally jumps out of the plane to avoid his advances, because that's where they are. Just a really great sort of combining her comedic and dramatic skills there, because like she is genuinely terrorized, like in that moment, like she feels genuine fear. So it's not just like this goofy comedic scene, even if like the button of her literally jumping out of the plane kind of plays as comedic. The scenes like that are where I sort of agree that when you think about this movie, it's like, oh, we're placing Goldie Hawn in the army and just like hijinks ensue, when there's actually a lot more depth that's being at least attempted to get at here, and I think for the most part does succeed at doing so.
Yeah, and honestly, like going into this film is not, as I was saying, that like it's a lot more trauma than I expected
Yeah.
for a character to go through in a screwball comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Like that scene in the airplane, it's just like oh wow, this poor woman has been lied to, and demeaned, and now she's the victim of an attempted assault. Like she literally jumps out of a plane to avoid being assaulted.
Yeah.
um and to see her growth from that is really what makes this film really work, is that it shows her learning that those behaviors are not okay and that she
Yeah.
deserves better.
Mm-hmm.
um and so yeah, like I really like this performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, to go back to it, some of the stuff where she's reuniting with Henri towards the end and they agree to get married is slightly weaker to me, but I do think she is so good in those moments when she realizes that he is not the man that she thought he was. Like when he asked her to sign the prenup and everything, when like he clearly seems hung up on his ex-girlfriend. You see a lot in what she does with her eyes, especially those very expressive Goldie Hawn eyes, that she is starting to lose interest in this guy. So yeah, and then all the way through that wedding scene, I think she's so in the pocket and you're so on her side as she marches off in her wedding dress into the unknown. Who knows where she goes after this, but you get the sense that she's going to be all right.
Yeah, you get the sense that she's going to be all right. You get the sense that the progress that she has made as a person, even if she wanted to, she couldn't reverse it, which is one of the great things about that last scene. And her essentially walking off into the sunset holding her own hand, more or less.
Yeah.
um I was so captured by, yeah, also like the paralleling of how the film starts with a wedding and then it ends with a wedding, her at completely different stages of her life,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that contextualizes and wraps everything up for her, like that it's a really strong ending for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very happy that Goldie Hawn got this nomination. I continue to hope all these decades later that more comedic star vehicles like this continue to be nominated, even when at this point, again, you would think we would have evolved by this point of our view of what great acting is, and that it doesn't always have to be the big, heavy dramas, that get in every year. So,
We'll see what
yeah,
happens
this
with
is,
Barbie. Actually, that'll be interesting to see if Margot
yeah,
Robbie, like, because a Margot Robbie nomination for Barbie would be a lot like the Goldie Hawn nomination for Private Benjamin. It's a
that's
similar
actually very
story of
true.
self-actualization,
Wow.
very comic, lighthearted, blockbuster, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and just a movie star turn that's also giving you these depths and shadings that you're not quite expecting. So yeah,
Wow.
it'll be interesting if Margot Robbie goes all the way, because looking back at Private Benjamin and thinking about Barbie now, it's like it's such an unconventional Oscar movie, but it shouldn't be.
Right.
Like if you can execute that kind of comedy as well as Goldie Hawn did and as Margot Robbie does, it's like, yeah, that should be appreciated as much as someone who is in the more quote unquote serious movie,
Hmm.
doing the more serious acting. Comedy is so hard, and to do it at this level is really special.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a wonderful comparison. And now I'm just thinking of how I feel like they could easily just swap roles, you know, at different points in their career. They could have, Goldie Hawn could have played Barbie if this was in the 80s, and Margot Robbie could have done a Private Benjamin. Anything else on Goldie Hawn before we move on to our next nominee?
No, I'm glad this was nominated.
Yeah.
It's unique. It stands out from the rest of these performances in a way that makes the category better.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so hard pivot once again into Mary Tyler Moore for Ordinary People. So I am very, very excited to be talking about Ordinary People. First of all, for people who don't know, it is one of my favorite films of all time, favorite Best Picture winners of all time, even. And I think part of it is this really compelling narrative of Mary Tyler Moore, America's sweetheart, someone who was beloved from TV, from the Dick Van Dyke Show to Mary Tyler Moore Show. It's an interesting narrative going into it, just, sight unseen of the performance. So Mary Tyler Moore, as I said in the beginning, is our only first time Oscar nominee here. This would be her only time nominated. But she really broke through on TV on Dick Van Dyke, as I said. She did a few movies in the 60s, but then she really blossomed even more with The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and she became a kind of icon, really, for modern working women, independent women, relatable, plucky, obviously very well liked. And so that's what made this choice to cast her as this cold, sort of narcissistic mother in Ordinary People so shocking and fascinating, I imagine, for audience members at the time to like see their favorite leading lady from TV in this role that makes it a little bit hard to root for her. So let's talk about it. Ordinary People, our Best Picture winner of the year. It's about this upper middle class family, the Jarretts, as they try to deal with the grief and the trauma of losing their eldest son, Buck, who died in a boating accident. And his younger brother, Conrad, played by Timothy Hutton, was there at the time, and he blames himself for his brother's death. And he eventually attempts suicide and has to stay in the hospital for a while. Mary Tyler Moore and Donald Sutherland play his parents, Beth and Calvin. Beth is very cold and distant with Conrad because, on some level, she might have some lingering resentments over him not being able to save Buck. And she's someone who likes to keep up appearances, and she doesn't want their personal family drama to be made public. And all of that creates a major distance with her and Conrad. And then Calvin is sort of in the middle, sort of operating as the mediator between the two. So let's talk Ordinary People. Daniel, our Best Picture winner of the year, like I said, also winning for Timothy Hutton, and Robert Redford wins for director. The screenplay wins, but Mary Tyler Moore does not. But what are your thoughts on Ordinary People, which I believe you hadn't seen before this week, correct? And just this
Correct.
departure for Mary Tyler Moore.
Correct. Yeah, this was one of my Oscar blind spots is Ordinary People, and one of my film history blind spots. So I was really glad to get the opportunity to see it. Especially given in hindsight, people like should have really beaten Raging Bull. That whole
Yes.
Oscar narrative continues to this day.
Yes.
This is an this I think it's pretty easily the best film of these nominees. It's so well drawn. Just the way it observes this family as it's sort of creating this negative space is what the film is doing. And one of the most difficult things that the film does do is it shows you this big hole in this family, and what's going on around it is a result of the death of this son and brother, and how that affects the entire family. I think it all comes down to this one great scene with Donald Sutherland where he says, our family might have been fine if it were never tested, more or less. And so it just could not stand up to this hardship because of who these people were, who they are, and how kind of irreconcilable those differences have become because now they're dealing with a crisis. So I really thought this was an incredibly well drawn film about family and loss. It's not necessarily going to be one of my all-time favorites, but I think I was really drawn in by this whole film, and yeah, definitely the best in this category as a film.
Yes. Well, what are our thoughts on Miss Mary Tyler Moore? I don't know if you had a relationship with her TV work before this too.
I have seen some of her TV. I used to watch the Dick Van Dyke Show on Nick at Night
Mm-hmm.
as a child. I have not seen as much of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, but I've seen some of it. Like, just through cultural osmosis, you absorb the Mary Tyler Moore Show to some extent as you're growing up
Mm-hmm.
covering and obsessed with media.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such a smart casting choice. It's such like because what you're doing is playing into her persona in a way, because you look at Mary Tyler Moore, you want her to be warm, you want her to be funny, you want her to be kind, because you sort of have learned to expect that from her as a persona. And so to have her be this withdrawn and withholding, it's such a good performance from her. I do think a lot of the performance sometimes, like if it like not doesn't hurt the performance at all, but I feel like a lot of the character comes down to the way people talk about this character and explain this character. So she's sort of embodying that. So I wonder how effective the film would be, or how effective the performance would be, if you didn't have other characters analyzing her at the same
Mm.
time that she's exhibiting these character traits. But yeah, excellent performance. I think one of the this category comes down to like 3 performances for me, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
Just like, and the other 2 are kind of like, okay. So this is one of those performances that I think one of the best in the category.
Yeah, this is a very special performance for me. It's a performance that I find to be very true to life, that it's honestly kind of chilling at times. The pain and the grief and the repressed feelings that are just sort of bubbling underneath the surface there. It just seems to come from a very intimate place for Mary, who at that time was actually just getting over a marriage, and she had gone through her own struggles, like with dealing with alcohol addiction, and she would also have to deal with her own grief over her son accidentally shooting himself that same year that Ordinary People was being released, which was after filming. But still, like, this was a woman who had a lot of troubles and demons, and I do think she used them to pretty great effect here. I haven't watched a lot of Dick Van Dyke or Mary Tyler Moore, so I can't say that I have that sort of personal connection as much with her that so many people did. But, I mean, even without that, you can see in these moments, like, in the beginning, like, she just has this luminous sort of smile, and this kind of like smile that could light up a room, like that sort of thing. And you would never tell that she is going through this intense family trauma, because she's all about keeping up appearances. And it's that inner pain that is not always visible, and, as you said, maybe is talked about more than is actually expressed, because she won't allow it to be seen. And the tragedy of it, I think, is that she's so terrified of what other people might think, and what other people might say about her, and how her decisions and her life kind of like are reflecting on her abilities as a mother and as a wife, that she is basically eating away at her insides until there's nothing left.
Yeah, and it's also, she wants to keep up appearances, but she's also trying to keep up her own sense of self throughout this thing, because she's not really equipped to handle this level of grief in herself or in others. So I
Right.
feel like she feels like she can't open the floodgates of grief when that's what her son is doing, that's what her husband is doing. They're very open, much more vulnerable. There's a sense that not only can she not let other people see that she's going through something like that, but she almost can't let herself feel it because she's not strong enough to withstand it.
Exactly. And that's why I think she responds in the way she does when she's around Conrad, and that feeling of numbness, like that feeling of not even knowing what to do. And like even like in the beginning, like the breakfast scene, you get this glimpse of this just lingering tension between the two of them right at the start, and how she only really is providing him with what he needs. And by needs, I mean like just like basic needs, not anything deeper than that. Like
Food,
she's
water,
making the
shelter.
breakfast. Right, right. And when he says like, "Oh, he's not hungry," she just takes the plate away and stuffs the toast down the garbage disposal in the sink, which isn't like an overtly aggressive action, but just like the casualness with how she does it, I think is very revealing. Like, it's not even a fight. It's just like, fine, he doesn't want breakfast. He doesn't want to engage. I'm just going to take care of it, and then it'll be done. And she can move on with her day. And it's so
Object lesson in
small.
passive aggression.
Yeah, totally. Yes. And just the subtleties, I think, are so perfectly captured for me that it doesn't always even feel like she's acting. Same thing at the dinner table where she, again, passive aggressively is saying like he should sign up for swimming again since it's been like a year. And she just wants to essentially like paper over the fact that he's still in grief and needs his mother. But she's so emotionally unavailable and caught up in her own grief and issues that she's totally in denial of. Perhaps maybe she does acknowledge it, but she doesn't obviously voice it, that she just kind of takes it out on him.
Yeah, it's, you know, the subtlety of what she's doing throughout the film, because you could make this character a monster, and she never does.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's so much subtlety in just the way she comes across, not necessarily as malicious, but as ill-equipped.
Right.
And that is hurting her husband, that is hurting her son. Like, they need her to be someone who she doesn't know how to be. And she's ultimately kind of a tragic character in that way, because, you know, we don't get that warm and fuzzy kind of resolution in the end. Like, we see two members of this family who could potentially move forward, and her who may be stuck for a while, who knows how long,
if not forever.
If not forever, just kind of denying these feelings in herself and denying them from the people in her life who she is supposed to care about, but she can't quite overcome what her image means to her, what her self-conception means to her, and what she thinks life is supposed to be like from the outside.
It's very tragic. I mean, like even the scene where she's looking around the photos in Buck's room where she thinks that she's alone, and you see how she's still just sort of languishing in this feeling of grief and sort of longing for it to be like it was before. I think that's probably the only scene in the film where we get her totally alone, and it's just kind of like almost an exhaling for her. And then, of course, when Conrad shows up and he kind of like startles her because she didn't know he was there, it's just so painful. Like, she barely even knows what to say to him. Like, it's like a brain fog that she gets when he's around. I'm actually curious what you think of like what she's thinking in moments like that. Like, is it that I don't want to say the wrong thing? Is it like I don't know what to say at all? Is it like I want to smack you? Like, what do you think is going through her mind in those moments?
I think a lot of what's going on through this character's mind is she's probably having a lot of thoughts that she can't quite, or she doesn't feel like she's allowed to say.
Yeah.
You know, because it's, you know, what we get the clear sense of is that she showed more outward affection for her, you know, her deceased son than Conrad. And, you know, whether she loved this other son more, she can't say that. You know, no one, you're not allowed to say that. She doesn't know how to relate to him. But she's supposed to be his mother. So there's a lot going on with her. I feel like I feel like she's the one who needs the therapy sessions with Judd Hirsch as much, if not more, than her son does, because she needs a place that is safe to be able to voice these thoughts, even if they're ugly thoughts that she doesn't voice but come through anyway, because her son can feel that he doesn't measure up to her the way his brother did, like, even though she doesn't say that, and she would never say that. I feel like it's a lot of thoughts that are troubling her, that, again, partly to maintain appearances of this family that is all together, she shoves them down, because that's not how you're supposed to feel about your son. That's not how you're supposed to feel about your family. Yeah, I do think there is a level of guilt in her character that, again, is another thing that she doesn't let herself express or to let anyone else see.
Yeah. And I think another interesting moment of that is when she brings up to her husband that they should go to London for Christmas, which would basically just interrupt Conrad's whole therapy, and that she clearly doesn't really think it would make a difference. So when Calvin asks her why, she says, because I want to get away. And then when she realizes that, oh, that actually sounds a little bit like selfish, maybe, she sort of couches that by saying, well, it would be good for all of us, you know? So I feel like we get those little revealing moments at times of her thinking so much about herself. And you could say whatever you want about the character and make like whatever judgments you want to say about her just being like narcissistic and kind of a monster or whatever you want to say. But I do think she is able to understand Beth on a deep emotional level, to the extent that even despite of all of those things, you can still see that it's just from the pain and the trauma superseding anything else. Is there some part of her innately that was always this way? I don't know, but this is kind of just like exacerbating that behavior.
Yeah, it's I think this is who she always has been, but has never, it's been easier to put up appearances, or to be the person she thinks she's supposed to be at any given moment, when she's not dealing with profound grief. And so, like, that was not part of her game plan. Like, that was not on her vision board for her life, is having terrible tragedy. And so now that it is, it's like, well, I want things to go back to normal. And she doesn't realize that normal is not an option, like, or the old normal is not an option.
Yeah.
Where, like, she just can't handle her life being derailed in the way that grief derails her life. She wants everyone else in her life, like her son attempting suicide and being hospitalized. It's like, that's inconvenient to her image of what her life is supposed to be like, and she doesn't know what the hell to do with it. And it's so sad watching her deny herself the connection that she needs, because she's withholding it from others, but she's also pushing it away from herself. And it really is heartbreaking. And I love the way how delicately it's written, and how you get all of this detail from that screenplay and from the direction and the acting, from what's unsaid, that this is what's missing from this family, and they're just not able to put it back together again.
Yeah. And then there's, Calvin telling that woman at the party that Conrad is seeing a therapist. That's another example of that. And just the look on her face, Beth's face, it's like she's still trying to make it seem like everything's okay. She's not going to make a scene by any means, but she's clearly feeling like he broke some sort of social code that they agreed on. And her just sort of scolding him on the car ride home is so tense and so effective, and how she really feels like personally offended that he's telling other people their business. And then in the process of that, clearly feeling that therapy as a concept is something to be covered up and ashamed of, and something done in private, like something you'd almost never admit to for other people. And it just tracks so perfectly with the character that she's more offended by what the neighbors might think than really confronting the truth of how things really are. And like you said, is the most needing of therapy, even though she is the least likely to ever do that, and would be offended by even told that she might need it.
Yeah, and when her husband does tell her, like, like, we should all have a session with our son's doctor, she's like, no, like, it's a sense of, we're not those kinds of people.
Right.
as opposed to like we are human beings with needs. It's like we are types. We fit a kind of mold that
Mm-hmm.
you know that she has set for herself and that she has set for her family, whether or not she realizes it consciously. Like she is set in this one way a family can be, and she's trying to drag it back to what it was, even though again the negative space in this family is what this film is drawing, is showing what this absence looks like, and she can't even bring herself to look at it.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think she gets so many great showcase moments throughout the film that express that, which I think it's interesting to bring up that she probably has the least amount of screen time of the five we're going to talk about here. But I do think she is still a key member of the film, obviously, and is still a lead, even if you could argue, obviously, that this is Conrad's story. I think she exhibits so much space of her own, and like we were saying before, it's other people talking about her, sort of like in the in the Anthony Hopkins and Silence of the Lambs kind of argument, when people say he is a lead even though he only has like 16 minutes of screen time. She for me, she's the one that I think about when I watch the film, even if it's Conrad's story, because there's so much more that goes left unexplored ultimately by the end for her, that you almost would want to see a film entirely from her perspective. But yeah, I think like the family photo scene is another one that's really chilling for her, when Calvin is like, hey, we should take a photo with just Conrad and her. And she just does whatever she can to get out of it, even if it means making a scene, basically, because at least it's like the privacy of their home. And it's just so unbearably awkward.
Yeah.
And that's where you can really feel her starting to unravel, I think, emotionally, because that's when she also breaks the plate afterwards and she says, I think it can be saved. Thesis for the whole film right there.
Yeah, the photograph scene is so tense because and it's her, Mary Tyler Moore walking a very fine tightrope in that scene, because she's sort of playing both like the distance and resentment for her surviving son, but also this attempt to play it off. She's trying to be casual about it. Oh no, let me take a picture of you, and like oh no, you two get, and her son
Yeah.
feels it acutely, and because he is going through therapy and he is getting more in touch with his emotions, he's the one who calls her on it. He's the one who, in her opinion, probably is the one who made it awkward, when
Yeah.
it's really her withholding of even the most basic affection for the son she has left. That is the reason that he makes a quote unquote makes a scene, and it's just her holding on to normalcy by her fingernails, and it's just her husband and her son are moving too far forward from her, and she can't catch up. She just can't
Yeah.
catch up to where they are emotionally.
Yeah. And the whole equilibrium of the family is off. And then, of course, the blow up at Christmas, because let's be honest, Christmas is a time for a family blow up, where she is just furious at Conrad for quitting the swim team like a month ago, but didn't tell them, is really devastating. And I think it's such a credit to the screenplay and the direction too, that it's like we gradually are getting these puzzle pieces to help us understand where the rift happened, and that how she never visited him in the hospital after his suicide attempt. Like, that's such a key piece of this emotional dynamic, especially after he tells her that she would have visited Buck in the hospital if it was him that was hurting. And she has the most devastating line in the film where she says, Buck never would have been in the hospital. And just from the look on her face, you can tell that even she recognizes like this might have been a step too far, but that on some level, she believes that.
Yeah, she is in that scene in particular. I feel like her opinion is almost like that her son being her, Conrad being suicidal, lashing out and being emotional are almost selfish of him. Like, I'm
Right.
trying to hold this family together, and in her mind that means making sure everything is neat and tidy and orderly, when in fact what she needs to do to keep this family together is embrace the mess, and understand the mess,
bless this mess,
and
you could
bless this
argue.
mess. Oh,
Yes.
what a mess.
Yes.
And and so she feels almost betrayed, like that sense, when she says, Buck wouldn't have been in the hospital. The sense is not just that Buck was stronger than you, but like Buck wouldn't have done this to us, as a family.
Yeah.
And it sort of reminds me, going back talking about Resurrection, where we had that scene of Ellen Burstyn at her father's bedside, telling us all of these rifts in this family that were caused, without ever really doing the work to show it, like just sort of having her say it all in one scene. Where this film, I feel like, does the actual work, where you are seeing these characters and their relationships drawn in a believable, and fully lived in way. And so then when you get one of those blowups, you know where it came from, you know why it's happening, you know what went into it, and you understand it from the script, from the direction, from the acting, everything that is leading up to the big moments. Like the big moments are entirely earned because the foundation has been laid for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like she just has such an intense understanding of Beth, to not just make her a heartless monster mother type, for as callous as she can be, clearly at times. She just has a very deep empathy, I think, for Beth and what she's going through. And also, just as an actress, an understanding that she can't just be overt with how she expresses what she's going through, and it feels very personal to her, which I think really helps in her delivering the performance. And then obviously later on, we have the scene where her and Calvin go off to Texas to once again escape their problems, and where they're on the golf course and she finally snaps and expresses her feelings of having sort of in her mind failed to really protect her child, her eldest son, and how she can't find that happiness anymore. I think is such a impactful scene. And for as silly as it is to bring up the Oscar discussion in the middle of this heavily traumatic film and discussion, the Oscar scene for her, where she finally is blowing up,
Yeah. And what's interesting is that what motivates that blow up, I think is I think the emotions that she's expressing in that scene have been there the whole time. Like, it's not
exactly.
The thing that sets her off is her husband refusing to let it go. Like, she makes that one little dig. It's like, oh, you always take Conrad's side. I can't remember the exact line. But and he's like, no, we're gonna unpack this now. and she does not want to do that. She thinks that's the antithesis of what a healthy family should be. She thinks that's not what normalcy is. That's not healing. Her husband wants to have it out and constantly wants to have it out, and now suddenly she is angry, not only at her husband, not only at her son, but she's angry that she has been made to be emotional openly. It's just the outrage of having to look that way in front of other people, is
out in the open,
is a big part of what her anger is in that scene. And it's a big part of what leads to, I'm sure we're going to talk about the scene where her husband finally confronts her with some of the best dialogue in the film, and her just reacting to it. It's like, I don't know if you're not strong. You can't handle this. You can't handle
you're not
us.
capable of it.
And just her kind of sitting in that realization, but still not being able to face it, is what makes this ultimately a tragic character, as much as or more than, like, she does not, Mary Tyler Moore does not play her as a villain per se. She plays her with an incredible amount of understanding and empathy from where this woman is coming from, what this woman believes about life and family, and where and how that disconnect kind of breaks her from the family she has left.
Yeah, that final scene for her, where she doesn't really say much of anything at all. It's all just her reacting. It's not even really an argument. it's just him kind of unloading all of his own feelings and emotions on her, and her just standing there stunned almost. It's one of those images for me that has never left my mind with this movie, is just like her almost dumbstruck, just like watching her husband reveal the truth of how things really are, essentially. And she probably knows, maybe deep down, even though it's really hard for her to admit that, and she probably never would, which is why she ultimately goes upstairs and just sort of orderly is packing her belongings, and it's just like, I cannot physically do this anymore at all.
Yeah.
And I love that she doesn't overplay the emotion of it either. Like, she does, I think, cry at one point just when she is alone, but only very briefly, just to sort of exhale for a little bit. And then she's like, okay, I'm just gonna go.
Yeah,
I'm
and
just gonna
underplaying
go.
it is part of who that character is, because
Exactly.
what she's confronted with in that scene is that her husband has just crossed the dividing line that there's no going back from. Like, I don't know if I still
Right.
love you. Like, there's
Yeah.
no going back from that at all. The irony is, I think their marriage is salvageable if they hash it out. If they, if she is willing to engage at that level of raw emotion, but she's just kind of like stunned silent, and all she can do is kind of keep running. And
Yeah.
her husband is putting it all on the table, and she realizes this is not salvageable, but she can't bring herself to go there. Like, she just can't go there in whatever her conception is of herself and what her family is. Like, she really isn't strong enough. And I think that's one of the interesting dynamics in the film, is showing what strength is. Like, you would think, quote unquote weakness is the suicide attempt, is needing a therapist, is always wanting to talk about your feelings, when in fact the weakness in the family comes from rigidity, is her inability to evolve and grow with the family as it's going through something traumatic. And it reminds me a little bit of the ending of Angels in America, like, because that film has, or that miniseries, well, the play and the limited series, is how I know it, is from Mike Nichols's limited series. Every character seems to be moving on, and then poor Patrick Wilson is still like screwed up at the end of it, and he's the only one who hasn't learned how to grow yet from these experiences, and so he's just sort of like wandering off into the wilderness of his own emotions. And that's what Mary Tyler Moore's character is doing in this film, is just kind of like, she's cut herself adrift because she doesn't know what else to do.
Yeah, it really does leave an impact, I think, this performance and this film, and it feels so modern to me. Even though this was released 43 years ago, this could be made today and have the same emotional depth and feeling, and arguably has more emotional depth and feeling than some films do today, or are willing to address today in a film on a somewhat mainstream level, at least. So yeah, I'm just grateful that the film exists, and that we it's a film where I feel like some people who don't respond to it as much, or are still caught up in like raging bull should have won discourse, there's so much going on beneath the surface of this film that you could fill an entire 2.5 hour podcast with and not even be fully exploring everything. So
and I think this is the kind of film that, they say they don't make films like this anymore, which is kind of true, because I feel like if this were to get made nowadays, this would easily be a limited series. They'd make this as a limited series. And whoever plays Mary Tyler Moore's role would probably win the Emmy for it, which also gives you more time to deal with this. I actually think the film does a fantastic job of dealing with it within the running time, but if you had even more time, I don't know, maybe that would maybe you just don't need that amount of time. Maybe this is the ideal length of telling this story, because Alvin Sargent and Robert Redford found just exactly the right way to pitch this, onto the screen.
So yeah, Mary Tyler Moore, this is one of my favorite just like one and done nominations. One of those times where an actress is only nominated one time and yet she just leaves so much on the table that's like nothing else could compare to that afterwards. I think this is an astonishing performance. So I was very happy to finally get to talk about it here. Please seek out Ordinary People if you haven't already.
Yes,
That's
it's one of
pitch.
the films that we're talking about that's streaming currently, so it's easy to
Well,
find.
that's nice, right? Yeah, because that doesn't always happen.
Although in preparing for this, I am starting to get back into physical media, so I did buy
Yay.
Coal Miner's Daughter and Gloria on DVD, and we'll be talking about both of those coming up.
Yes. Alrighty. Well, let's move on to our final losing nominee today, which is Gena Rowlands in Gloria.
That loser, Gena Rowlands.
God. At least she would eventually have an honorary Oscar. But anyway, happy to be talking about Gena Rowlands again. Listeners will remember that Sophia and I raved about A Woman Under the Influence, her performance there in the 1974 episode. Very easily gave her my win there. That's one of my favorites of all time. And once again, she is working here with her husband and frequent collaborator, John Cassavetes. So by this point, she's also done Opening Night with her husband in 1977, snubbed that year. Here she's back with him, and he apparently was sort of disappointed with the releases of Opening Night and The Killing of a Chinese Bookie, so he needed money and sold this script for Gloria, and the studio wanted Gena Rowlands and Cassavetes as like a package deal, essentially, and he was kind of reluctant about it due to the nature of the film, because it's very not really a Cassavetes type of thing, but he did it anyway. This is probably by far his most mainstream effort in the sort of crime thriller vein, definitely more traditional feeling than his more experimental sort of independent films, but is still very much, you're seeing some of the Cassavetes touches, which we might get into, but it's about a hit that's taken out against an accountant and his family, and apparently the accountant is working with the mob, but is also informing on them to the FBI, and the family's neighbor, Gloria, played by Gena Rowlands, she stops by randomly one day, shortly before the hit is about to take place, and she is tasked with reluctantly taking in this boy, their son, and goes on the run with him. And as we come to find out, Gloria also had a previous relationship with one of the influential men in the mob, so she fights back whenever they go after her and Paul. Meanwhile, she and Paul have a kind of contentious relationship, and she goes back and forth between wanting to protect him and also wanting to just completely abandon him. So let's talk Gena Rowlands in Gloria. Thoughts on Gena Rowlands as this sort of badass Avenger here?
I think this is similar to Resurrection in that I think Gena Rowlands, this is a really good performance in a film that she's working hard to elevate. Because I don't think the film, I think the film is really what handicaps her a little bit in her performance is I feel like this script is so inconsistent with her and this boy she's taking care of, because in one scene, he's like latched onto her, like, we're together, we're in this together. The next scene, they're like, I'm gonna leave you on the curb, I don't need you. And it just kind of goes back and forth that way. And it's a little bit repetitive, because also she's having these encounters with the mob, and then she's narrowly escaping, and then she's back, and then she's trying to make a deal, and then she's narrowly escaping. And so it writes itself into so many corners that I'm like for Gena Rowlands to pull out something from this is actually quite impressive. And there are some really great moments that are really just like the grit in her performance are so great. There's a moment on the subway where she's like facing the camera, pointing the gun, almost like daring them to come at her. Like that's a great shot, and that's a great performance from her. So this is another case where I really appreciate the heavy lifting that Gena Rowlands is doing, because I don't think the film kind of lives up to what she's given to it.
Yeah. This is another pretty unusual film in this lineup. I can't say we get a lot of crime films of this variety in this category just to begin with. And, this kind of feels like exactly what you would expect it to be, which is like character study, independent cinema feel of John Cassavetes that's sort of been smushed into like a standard New York City gritty crime thriller, you know?
Although I got to give props to the Bronx representation. I live in the Bronx, and this feels like it feels so authentically New York.
There you go.
That like
Yeah.
one of my favorite things about the film is just the way it depicts New York City in that era. It feels very grounded and lived in. So I appreciated about the film more than the script.
Right. Right. And then I think this dynamic that her and the boy have is very standard dynamic that we get a lot, which is like older, tough protector paired up with kind of annoying, precocious child, right? So it's a film where I definitely felt like the push and pull of the mainstream and the more gritty independent going on here, and don't know if it fully succeeds for me, but as another fantastic showcase for Gena Rowlands, I think it does work. I find her to be so versatile, even though she is sort of cementing a bit of a screen persona by this point as these kind of like neurotic types, like New Yorker. Like it's a very specific vibe. And I think seeing that screen persona in the body of this like badass avenging former gangsters mall is just, it's just fun, you know, as a fan of hers. There's also this quote that Gena Rowlands said around this time that I found where she said, when I read the script, I knew I wanted a walk for her. I wanted something that from the minute you saw me, you knew I could handle myself on the streets of New York. So I started thinking about when I lived in New York, how differently I walked down the street when there was nobody but me. It was a walk that said, they'd better watch out. And I do think she does have this kind of like frank working class New York broad kind of attitude, like very blunt, like when she says, I hate kids, especially yours. Like that's a very good
in front
opening
of the
line.
kids.
Right. Like, okay, you immediately get a sense of like, okay, I understand who this woman is, you know? And I think she lives up to her mission there. I would say like she is believable as this character.
Yeah, I fully agree. She's 100% believable as this character. I never have any doubt that she can handle herself in the milieu that she's in.
Right.
I do think that what is less convincing is her relationship with the boy, because I don't think we ever really get a true sense of why she's willing, like she says at the beginning, I don't like your kids. and
Right.
and suddenly we have to believe that she's willing to in broad daylight shoot at the a car full of mobsters to protect this boy. And I never quite believed that, but I don't think that's a fault in her performance. I think that's really that's something that was not Gena Rowlands' responsibility to make convincing. Yeah, I think that's more on the script level where we need more of either more bonding time between the two of them or more consistency of where they go from really abrasive to each other to more warm and affectionate towards each other. Instead, it just kind of jerks back and forth between those things. But as a tough, broad Gena Rowlands is unimpeachable.
Yes. I mean, for the relationship with them, I do like that she doesn't really talk down to him at all. Like, I feel like they're just like, she would talk to him like she would talk to any adult, basically, if he's being a little shit to her. But yeah, is sort of stepping into this mother hen role at the same time. I mean, I don't know. It's a weird character, like, in terms of consistency, like you were saying, but I do think she just suits it pretty perfectly because of her ability to give you that strength and a little bit of like that Natasha Lyonne kind of street smart attitude, but then like that hint of softness and a bit of like a sentimentality in a way. You know what I mean? Like it's not like she's just like completely hardened as a person. Like she has her soft spots at times.
I think that's a really great comparison to Natasha Lyonne. I think if they remade this movie again, because they did in the 90s with Sharon Stone, I think the current actress who would be best. I think Natasha Lyonne would be fantastic. And
100%.
I think she
Yeah.
might even elevate, like if she had this exact script, I think she might even elevate it, because I think Natasha Lyonne also has this level of humor that
Right. Exactly.
like would really play well with this relationship with this child.
Hmm.
Abrasive, but also kind of wisecracking in a way that would have made the relationship a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think for me, what I always love in Gena Rowlands is the little choices that she makes. Like, there's this one moment when she's watching the TV report, the news report, and they mention her being the abductor of this kid. And it's like this sort of flash of recognition that she has. And we see like this little hint of a smile. Like she sort of feels like she's been acknowledged for something, but then it turns out to be that she knows the mob that was involved in this hit against this kid's family. But I just love little tiny moments of that where we just sort of narrow in on her face because she can do so much with it. And then the scene when like they see her on the street and she's negotiating with them, and she's like halfway again between wanting to protect him or just like making him run away somewhere. And I think at times like that does make that inner conflict feel natural and not too clunky when it easily could have been. And then like when she takes out the gun at that point and just starts shooting at the men, I'm just like, here we go. And like, even though she's not really known for action, crime, pulpy, thriller type stuff, she surprisingly is natural at it. Like when I saw this, I was like, I wish there was like a series of badass Gena Rowlands vigilante movies in the 80s, maybe.
Like Genesploitation.
Yes, precisely. Yes. Yeah, and I love, those other moments where we get of her like reacting to other people. Like when she's on the bus at one point and she sees this guy who she eventually says is her uncle, which okay. And he kind of like scolds her for being out of her depth, basically. And she just has like this very steely resolve, but is also like clearly trying to contain her emotions because on some level she's like, yeah, I kind of am out of my depth and I'm kind of just improvising on the spot. But like, you know what? I'm not going to let people see me sweat, essentially. So,
yeah, she, as a character, Gloria is very much making it up as she goes along.
yes.
And, Gena Rowlands makes that believable in that she can never show weakness. She can't afford to show weakness,
Right.
especially because even her life is in danger the second she takes this child.
Yep.
And so like there are these forks in the road, like that first moment where she pulls out a gun and shoots the car, where it's like, okay, this is point of no return.
Yeah.
This is where you're all into it. And so it almost at that point doesn't even matter what she thinks of this child. It's as much to say she is fighting as much to save herself as she is to save this kid, which is tough for the film because I think the film writes itself into a couple of corners that it's hard to get out of.
Yeah.
But you can see the resolve, you can see the grit and determination, and Gena Rowlands is nothing if not gritty and determined in this role. It is probably the best thing about the film is her.
Yeah, pretty easily, I would say. I also think the scene at the cemetery is really kind of bittersweet because she's sort of like she's providing this nice sort of gesture to him of trying to give him a sense of closure because his entire family is dead, and you can tell that her heart is breaking a little bit for this kid. I think for her it's just like the reason that she is so protective of him, even if she has her second thoughts every now and again, is that the circumstances of what's happened to him more than anything else, more than like who he actually is, because he's not a great kid, to be honest. Like he's doing a little too much sassing of Gena Rowlands, and I'm like, do you know who you're talking to? But you feel like she's starting to have warmer feelings for him in that cemetery sequence. And I think she shows that without falling into too much cliche, even if this is a dynamic that we've seen time and time again,
Yeah, it is pretty standard, and I would love to see what Gena Rowlands could have done with this role if it had been a little bit more original, a little bit more consistent. Maybe she's on the run from the mob for other reasons, or she's not protecting this child that this poor Razzie nominated child, which is as bad as
oh my god,
which is as bad as
awful.
having your family annihilated as getting a Razzie nomination. It's like just a child.
This poor boy.
Poor boy run out of Hollywood. Thankfully the Razzies have since been humbled and by their targeting of children.
Also, this very year was Shelley Duvall nominated for The Shining. What are we doing? Anyway.
One of those rare occasions where you can talk about the Razzies and Oscars about the same film. But I would love to see this Gloria character in a different script, because I think Gena Rowlands is totally dialed into her in a way that the film isn't entirely.
For some reason now I'm just picturing her being like John Wick. And it's like we just keep getting, like, it keeps escalating further and further, and she's just still on the run and she still survives. Just like going across the country. Would have liked to have seen it, I guess. But I think ultimately it's a pretty silly movie at the end of the day, and not one that I think is the complex maybe character study that John Cassavetes was trying to infuse into it. But she completely makes it work. And as I sometimes say, it's not best actress in a great film, it's just best actress. So I think this is a good example of that. Even though I did, at least I had a good time with it, it's just, I think she is clearly better than this material at the end of the day. So
yeah, it's another situation, just like with Ellen Burstyn. It's like, it's Gena Rowlands. You're not going to get a bad performance in this material. Right, exactly. You just kind of wish the material were there for her as much as she's there for it.
Shall we move on to our winner?
Let's.
Miss Sissy Spacek in Coal Miner's Daughter. Here we come to our first winner of the 80s, Sissy Spacek. Previous nominee for Carrie, so she's already in the club. And in between Carrie and Coal Miner's Daughter, her big film was Three Women, which we talked about on a bonus episode, and she's excellent in that alongside Shelley Duvall. And then she doesn't make another movie until Coal Miner's Daughter, so I guess you could say she's on a decent hit streak, at least in terms of cementing her reputation, and one of the best young actresses at this time. So Coal Miner's Daughter comes about basically because of Loretta Lynn herself, the country music star, for people who don't know Loretta Lynn, and her writing her memoir. And Loretta apparently just like went around on talk shows and at concerts saying that Sissy Spacek was going to play her in the adaptation, even though Sissy had not signed on to anything by that point. So I mean, I guess the power of manifestation there. But I guess she had picked her out of a bunch of photos of potential actresses to play her and really just had this like laser focus on having it be Sissy. So they eventually did meet, and she was a little reluctant at first because Sissy sort of wanted to distance herself a little bit from like being like the country kind of actress in that way, like the Southern type. But she was very charmed by Loretta, and she ended up basically shadowing her and touring with her and trying to copy all her mannerisms and her speaking voice, her singing voice. And she also apparently committed to staying in character as Loretta on set. And so she really took the responsibility very seriously, and obviously it paid off here. So Coal Miner's Daughter is about Loretta Lynn and her upbringing in Butcher Hollow in Kentucky, and her very young marriage to Doolittle Lynn, played by Tommy Lee Jones here.
Let's hope he didn't stay in character for the whole film.
That would be terrifying. So he kind of has this tendency to be abusive to her, but is also managing her budding singing career. And we see how she becomes this local favorite and then has this meteoric rise to being a true country star, while also facing a number of difficulties and tragedies in her life, including the death of her father and also the death of her friend and fellow singer Patsy Cline, and the pressures of the tour, and how all of this leads to a breaking point for her. So let's talk our winner here, Sissy Spacek. Thoughts on the great Sissy Spacek overall and her Oscar-winning performance?
Well, love Sissy Spacek. It's one of my favorite actresses. I had seen this, but I'd seen this so long ago that basically seeing it again was seeing it for the first time. And it's such an interesting film because it's a biopic told in the middle of someone's life, because Loretta Lynn lived another 42 years after this movie.
Right.
So it's interesting to see what this film made of her early life, and where it kind of left you off at the end, which is, I think, where the film's at its weakest, is trying to figure out kind of how to wrap things up around what this segment of her story is about. But I was surprised at the beginning that Sissy Spacek was playing 13.
Yeah,
and yet
there's that.
After it's jarring for like 2 scenes, and then I believe it, because Sissy Spacek is so good at playing that naivete, so good at playing that kind of youthful quality without overdoing it. It would be hard to cast like a 13-year-old actress to play her, given some of the scenes that she's got to play and what happens to her in this early relationship with Doolittle. It's such a good performance in this. What I especially loved was that sense of, here's a woman who has never been able to grow up on her own terms. It's always been decisions made by other people, usually the man in her life. She sort of retains that childlike quality throughout her life and throughout the film. She's always a little bit naive. She's always a little bit sheltered, even though she has lived this incredibly difficult life up to her stardom. And I thought the film does that incredibly well. It does feel like a little bit of a segment of a story as opposed to a full story, because inevitably Loretta Lynn's life did not end when this film ends. She was there in the audience as Sissy Spacek was accepting the Oscar for playing her. So it's a little bit of an imperfect film in deciding what it wants to say, but I feel like as a performance vehicle, this was basically designed to win Sissy Spacek an Oscar.
Absolutely. This for me is such a great example of someone just being the right actress at the right time in the right role. And I'm not saying that it came easy to Sissy Spacek, but it is pretty remarkable to me how much she just fits as Loretta Lynn, and there isn't this feeling of her straining or like putting in effort in this super impressive showy way. She just kind of becomes her. And that's something that I've talked about with some of the great Best Actress winners of the 70s, like Ellen Burstyn and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, like Sally Field and Norma Ray, where they just really immerse themselves in these characters and completely carry their films from start to finish. I also think what makes Coal Miner's Daughter such a successful film in this music biopic genre that we're getting a lot of these days, by the way,
yes,
is that it's just perfectly fitting of Loretta Lynn and her sort of humble background, but also her strong will, and that combination there, I think, is really just like Sissy Spacek to a T. Even though it's like she's a grown woman at this point, she still has a very youthful screen presence at this stage in her career that really lends itself to seeing just how young she was when all of this was happening to her, getting married, having babies, launching this music career. And there is like an innocence in her appearance that I think really also is contrasting nicely with her also seeming kind of wise beyond her years at times, and like a very perceptive quality that separates her from maybe other people her age.
Yeah.
So
and it's this wisdom that she doesn't even get to know she has a lot of the time, because she is kind of pulled around by her husband and sort of doing his bidding a lot of the time. So like she has earned this wisdom and grit and strength that she only really gradually gets to see, because she's kind of stuck in this arrested development where her husband kind of keeps her childlike for as long as humanly possible. Doesn't even let her wear makeup, gets angry when she tries to assert literally just the smallest iota of independence and adulthood in which is creepy in many ways.
Yes.
You know, this concluding our F-boy trilogy in this category.
Truly.
where in this case she married him and stayed with him, which is a difficult thing I think for the film to reconcile. I don't think the film ever, I don't think I ever understood what the film wanted me to get out of this relationship that starts with like this, the rape of your child bride, and then, you know, eventually they just sort of stay together, and it's hard to know what the film really thinks about it, because, you know, obviously the film can't rewrite history and be like, you know, and then she left him at the altar like Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin. Yeah, so it's really difficult to figure out exactly how to even handle that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the one of the last scenes, she does get, like, when he tries to buy her a house, basically, and like build this property, she does at least get to say like that she wants to be consulted on these things, please, before you do such grand gestures. And I think that is the kind of pinpoint that we have at this point in Loretta's real life relationship with Doolittle at this time, of being like, yeah, he's kind of an asshole, and yet at least I'm able to express my own feelings at times in the end. Like she has sort of grown up and feels comfortable with expressing herself in that way. But yeah, I do agree generally that the film is a little not always knowing what to do with that, and maybe that's partly just Loretta being involved in the process, because that sometimes can affect these kinds of movies.
Yeah, I feel like the film is trying to tell her to leave him, but biographically that would just be inaccurate to the story.
Yeah. Like so we're just kind of shackled to that.
Yeah. This is unhealthy, girl. You get out while you can.
Yeah. This film was made as a message for her to get out. Yeah. Anyway, I think, you know, all of her voice work is fantastic. Her accent, I think, is pretty perfectly calibrated, because Sissy has actually said that, like, even in Kentucky, no one sounds exactly like Loretta does, and it feels to me very specific, you know, every syllable, just like the twang of it. It doesn't feel to me like here's this Hollywood star trying to sound like a Southerner. It feels like very entrenched in the community, and I think Sissy, being like, you know, she's a Texas girl herself, really gives like an innate understanding of just like the technicalities of the accent and the body language of, you know, young girls and women from the South. And to me, it just feels completely natural.
Yeah, just totally, like, you don't think about the accent during the film just because it seems so natural to the performance and the character. You know, everything about her, again, like her playing 13 at the beginning of this film, which could take you out of the film immediately, but she plays it so naturally that you really believe her in the way that, in a weird way, remind me a little bit of like what Florence Pugh was doing in Little Women, where she's playing this child version of her character. And you believe it because of the performance and because of the details in the mannerisms that really convey this is this character's youth. This is a child, without having to overly play that hand.
Yeah, and I think when we get into the relationship stuff and her realizing after what's happened to her that, like, this is not what I expected married life to be, I think she communicates that really well, especially when he hits her on the morning after their wedding, even though he had promised her father that he would never hit her. And you can tell just from her face that she knows this is not going to be a walk in the park, this relationship, this marriage. But she is also a fighter too. You know, she's not like a wilting flower type. Like when she chases off that woman with who her husband seems to be flirting with, she's not afraid to like speak her mind at points. So I think she is able to show just a lot of range even before we get to the fame part of the story. And I don't know, I can't even imagine another actress in this role really like playing this with the depth of it, but also just like the simplicity of it at the same time.
And to play that range of ages, and, you know, to do that believably is incredibly difficult to do. As you mentioned, when she's running off that that girl from Doolittle, like you not only is she standing up for herself, but you believe this is how a girl who is still growing up, uh, this is how she would react. Like you believe
Exactly.
that at the maturity level she is at the time, this is who she is, and Sissy Spacek conveys that really perfect.
Yeah. So then, once we get into the arc of her as this rising music star, I think she nails the sort of contradictions of like having this great talent, but not really thinking in the beginning, at least, that she can do anything with it. And especially in that first performance at the country hall, and she's just like paralyzed with fear almost at first, but then is gradually warming up as the crowd seems to be embracing her. And again, I like so much of this, I think, could be cheesy, but I think she is so in the pocket. And also Michael Apted's direction being so gritty and sort of naturalistic in this, like in that 70s way, I think really helps it to feel authentic. And like even her singing voice is so clear and distinct that it's believable too that she would be a superstar, because she is doing her own singing here and trying to sound like Loretta Lynn. And I do think another thing that we get sometimes with movies and shows about singers and superstars, sometimes it's not always believable that the person would actually become a superstar just in the way that they're performing. But I think here she does.
Yeah, I totally believe her as this, burgeoning star, not just because of the singing voice, but because of the personality in it.
Yeah.
She has this incredibly authentic and unique way about her that is just incredibly charming and infectious. And
Mm-hmm.
so you totally believe that when she's touring these radio stations, that these people are won over by her, and that she
Mm-hmm.
wins over the audience, with her music, even though she's kind of surprised by it. She
Right.
doesn't think of herself that way, for a while at least, and it's always entirely believable in Spacek's performance.
Yeah. And I love that scene when I think she's on the tractor with him and she's like, I really want it. Like she wants to pursue this. I think that's a very earned moment too. And I think another key scene is after her father dies. I'm just realizing now, like, all of these have to do with death in some way, either directly or indirectly. Like, these characters are facing, like, death all around them. I don't know. Just a weird trend of 1980
Yeah,
specifically.
everyone loses some sort of family member, or husband,
Yeah.
son, father.
Hmm.
It's it's a trauma packed category, for as
Yes.
wide ranging as these films are to tackle that subject.
Exactly. That is the common theme, death and trauma. Yes. But I mean, like that, and her also finding out that her mother's moving away, and like that scene where she's in the woods, I think, with her husband, and just like grieving the fact that that part of her life feels kind of over, even with her being like in this relationship with Doolittle and their kids, like she's not entirely living a happy existence. So she doesn't really have like those strong roots anymore, And of course, she doesn't realize by that time that like she's just going to be on this nonstop roller coaster after that. But I think the way that she plays that scene is so sincere and vulnerable that you can't help but to feel for her.
Yeah, and again, how she conveys the character's age and naivete throughout. This girl who is always almost stuck in that like 13 to 15-year-old girl maturity
Yeah.
level, that her husband kind of marries her in. And it's so beautiful watching Sissy Spacek empathize with that kind of naivete, that kind of youthful quality, without condescending to her at all. Because, like you say, she is willing to stand up for herself from time to time. She does have a kind of grit and determination to her, but she's also still very young and very immature in a lot of things, and understanding a lot of things. And Sissy Spacek does a great job of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I feel like after that, the fame part of her arc here is pretty rushed, and I think is intentionally so, because like sometimes that can happen. Like I feel like people have talked about that with like the 2018 version of A Star Is Born, like when the fame part of that happens, like it feels like this whirlwind and we're not really like staying in that very much. Here, I think it's incredibly intentional what they're doing here, because that is how Loretta feels, is that like she has all these responsibilities and like she's dealing with, suddenly her best friend Patsy Cline died in a plane crash, and like now she's having to take pills just to, or like, you know, drugs to keep up with the demands of being a touring star. It's just a lot. And, you know, it's all leading up to that scene where she has the nervous breakdown on stage, talking about how life has happened so fast for her and she can't hardly keep up anymore. And I think it's so tense and very gripping because you can really see her at that breaking point, and she's still, even in the middle of this, trying to keep it together even as she's speaking to this crowd, but it's like her body just gives out, essentially. I think that's a really excellent scene for her.
Yeah, that's your like quintessential Oscar kind of clip scene.
Well, there you go. Right.
You know, where she's having that nervous breakdown. I did think the latter half of, or the latter portions of the film, like as you say, they move through her fame really quickly. I think it might be a little bit too quick in the sense that like we get like those little details, like her taking pills. It's like she's taking. I looked at the running time for the film as it's running long. I'm like, there are 20 minutes left. We don't have time for pills. like
now
you want
this,
to introduce
right, yeah.
this. You want to introduce this like maybe in the midway point.
Fair.
And so like, you know, her career is like moving really, really fast. And I feel like we needed a little, or at least I did, I needed a little bit more time to, you know, of developing what makes her so exhausted and what makes, you know, that moment
that's fair.
pop. But yeah, she's entirely believable in it because it's also a moment where she's reflecting on, you know, how like life has happened to her instead of her making decisions in life. And just even her standing there is a decision essentially made by someone else, because she's told like, you got to get out there, they're waiting for you. And she just kind of collapses under all that pressure. And it's not, you know, to me, I took it not just as the pressures of the fame, but the pressures of having to grow up so fast, and not really having like growing up in terms of what happens to you, like the marriage, the kids, the career, but not having enough time to grow up as a person, like, you know, just to really discover herself and what she wants and what she needs, and just trying to kind of be pulled along that ride. She, you know, she's had sort of all the stuff happen to her. It was interesting when I was looking up these, I wanted to know like what the age differences were, what, you know, who was what age when everything was happening. She and Patsy Cline were contemporaries. Like they were, I believe, born in the same year. And just the difference between them, you know, where Patsy Cline seems so much like the big sister, this much more worldly person who has lived this life, and Patsy Cline or Loretta Lynn has kind of been pulled through it, and not had a chance to grow up the way she should have. It all leads up to that moment of breakdown where it's really impactful, and really the thesis statement, I think, of the character.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, great performance from Sissy. You could tell, again, she really believed in, you know, wanting to tell this story responsibly, and just, yeah, really committed to it. I think there's part of me that feels like I'm missing like this one extra thing to really put it over the top for me, and I don't know what to put my finger on for what that is, but it's hard to quibble with her winning for this performance. I think she's in full command.
Yeah, I think it's just something that the film is missing a little bit. You know,
yeah, I think so too.
It has no choice but to just kind of choose a place to stop. And you know, the thing that makes it difficult for me as a film is that it brings her through like the pills and then the breakdown on stage, and then she rests for a minute, and then 2 scenes later she's back on stage, and she's like, it's the triumphant end of the movie where she's singing Coal Miner's Daughter, and it's like, well, how did we really get there other than the film needed a place to land? So I do feel like, but inevitably the film was going to be incomplete in that sense, because subject was still alive and working, and her career would last for decades longer. I would almost like to see a Coal Miner's Daughter sequel.
Oh, yeah.
With Sissy Spacek back in the role, playing
She
her
could do
later
it.
on in her life. She could absolutely do it. It would be a Coal Miner's Daughter, the Golden Age.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I think the film definitely kind of stops more than ends, but ultimately it's, such a performance vehicle that's kind of like the main attraction anyway, more than like the story. So let's get to this Best Actress race. So to talk about some precursors here, Sissy Spacek won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical, which is sort of a stretch, but that's fine. Technically, there's music in the film that she is performing.
We've seen that stretched so many times. Yeah. This is certainly one of them.
Yeah. She also won the National Society of Film Critics Award, the Los Angeles Film Critics Award, and the New York Film Critics Award, and also the National Board of Review. So she pretty much swept everything that there was to win in 1980. And then we had Mary Tyler Moore winning the Golden Globe for drama, and she was a nominee for some critics awards. Ellen Burstyn, Goldie Hawn, and Gena Rowlands were also all Golden Globe nominees. The only other win I could find was Gena Rowlands won with the Boston Film Critics. So good for you, Gena Rowlands, there. Everyone kind of had a little bit of something, so that's kind of nice to see, but Sissy very much dominated the precursors, and there was very little suspense that she was just going to steamroll to the Oscar too. So why do we think Sissy was our big winner?
I mean, it's as you said, right performer, right role, right time. Like she was coming off of Carrie, a few years before. She fits that kind of young ingenue mold that Hollywood certainly loves to celebrate. And it's a biographical performance, a showy performance. She's a lot of emotion to it. She's performing in it. She's singing in it. So it feels like right over the plate for an Oscar. Like
checks all the boxes.
Checks all the boxes. I'm a little surprised with given how strong Ordinary People ended up winning Best Picture, that Mary Tyler Moore wasn't more competitive on the critics circuit. Although I will say that I did see that she and Goldie Hawn were like runners up, I believe, at National Society and maybe New York or LA. And those really are the three performances in this category for me: is Goldie, Mary Tyler Moore, and Sissy Spacek.
Agreed.
So I really feel like the right three were headed towards the finish line, and the most prototypical Oscar performance, not to denigrate it at all, ended up winning.
I completely agree with that. And I don't want to be repetitive with what I've talked about in the 70s season, but I also kind of think that this is a continuation of a pattern that I've talked about there, where regardless of the quality of the performances, the characters that are a little bit on the darker side or a little more morally complicated tend to be passed over at times in favor of characters who are a little bit easier to embrace. It's not a hard and fast rule. Every year is different, but I think the character of Loretta Lynn is so winning that it's just a little easier to go down than Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People, or like even Gena Rowlands in Gloria. I think Goldie Hawn is also very winning in Private Benjamin, but that performance I think feels a little more akin to just, your average star vehicle comedy than something that the Oscars would want to reward necessarily.
Especially because Goldie had already won. I don't know if there would have been urgency to give Goldie a lead Oscar for like a really broad comedy.
Right. Sort of a nomination as the reward for her in that sense. And then Resurrection, I think, was so underseen. So I don't think Ellen Burstyn really contended for the win. For me, it does feel like it would be a battle of the Golden Globe winners here. And I think despite Ordinary People being the Best Picture winner, I can just see some Academy members having a problem with the character of Beth, which I don't think is warranted. And I think it's honestly kind of a plus in her performance that she's able to get such a reaction out of people. But I think ultimately Sissy is able to do so much in her performance and show all these different layers and just be so innately likable at the same time that it probably wasn't even close. I would imagine she got the lion's share of votes here.
She's so central, obviously, to Coal Miner's Daughter, like playing the
Exactly.
title character. She's in basically every scene. Where Mary Tyler Moore, that's not like it's like a 3-person ensemble, but like it's much more about
it's
this.
a 3-lead movie.
Yeah, it's this. So Sissy Spacek is much more central and much more the singular focus of her film. So it's easier also to go with her that way. When you got Mary Tyler Moore, who is, as you said, probably has the least screen time of the nominees in this category.
Yeah, there's not really too much else we can attribute there. It seems like a pretty, again, clean cut winner in the end. I'm sure everyone who went, like every one of these nominees, knew it was going to be Sissy Spacek. There didn't seem to be much surprise in the 5 boxes when I watched that video again. So yeah, and Sissy was very, very happy to win that award. And then there was a funny moment at the end where she literally walks back into the audience rather than going backstage, because she's just like, okay, I've won my Oscar, now I can go back to my seat.
Which feels like a thing that Loretta Lynn in Coal Miner's Daughter would have done.
Exactly. So she's still in character. All right, let's get to some Twitter questions. Both Chelsea and Matt Stillman want us to talk about this possibly being an underrated lineup that people don't really mention a lot as like a great lineup. Do we think this is one of the great lineups?
I don't necessarily think it's a great lineup or like one of the great lineups. I don't think there's a bad performance in here, which you can't always say.
Yeah, Lord knows that's true.
And like, certainly I can't fault the Oscars for picking any of these performances, but like just the films aren't all as strong as the performances in them. And I think obviously, any performance can be better if the film around it is flat out great. So I do think that holds back this lineup a little bit. Like it's especially like Gloria and Resurrection. I think of a great Best Actress lineup as one where it's like all killer, no filler, and just those two as films just don't feel like they hold up to me as much as as would elevate this category to all-timer status.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not 1974, which I have hailed as one of the best of all time, but I was surprised with how much I generally liked this lineup overall. Again, I'd only seen 3 of them before, but I did end up liking all the performances just in watching them this week. So I don't know. I like all of them as actresses, so it's nice to see them all in the same category together. There's not a dull one in the bunch,
and all doing such
nice.
different things. That's when I really appreciate an Oscar lineup where you get like a broad range of film, because especially when they show clips at an Oscar ceremony, and I see so many different kinds of stories told in so many different kinds of ways, it makes me more excited to watch movies. So just seeing the variety in this category is really great.
Seth Austin Stull said, how much do you think Loretta Lynn's very public endorsement and publicity for Sissy helped her?
I mean, it couldn't have hurt. I mean, you don't want necessarily Loretta Lynn going around saying like, it was really terrible playing me in that movie was Sissy Spacek. That might have rubbed off on the Academy a little negatively. Although on the other hand, like when you've got a flattering portrayal, I'm not sure how much that necessarily the subject of the film saying this was really great, it's really nice to me. I don't know how much that would have gone over, but certainly having the endorsement of the person who plays you in a performance that's this well regarded already certainly couldn't hurt.
I think it provided a very positive narrative ultimately, because if there was like weird feelings about how she was portrayed, I think that might affect things. And
it gives you the opportunity, like, because it'll make voters feel like they're voting for Sissy Spacek, but they're also kind of voting for Loretta.
Yes, just like they voted for Freddie Mercury.
Yes.
Moving on. Kareem Balak said, since this is a debate up to today when it comes to biopics of musicians and musical performances, how much did the fact that Spacek performed the songs herself help secure the award?
I don't know. I sometimes think it's a little bit overrated factor. Like, I mean, it's certainly part of the press kind of publicity that you get. It's like, oh, I not only played this role, I sung my own songs. But like, Marion Cotillard, I don't believe sang most of her work in La Vie en Rose. Rami Malek in Bohemian Rhapsody was certainly not doing most of
lip syncing for his life.
So I really think if you're able to embody the character, singing your own role is certainly a bonus, and it can certainly help with your narrative, as it did with Reese Witherspoon. That certainly helped her narrative for Walk the Line. I don't necessarily think it's a deal breaker, but it's another thing. Like, you have the endorsement of the subject of the film, and you're singing her songs. That certainly
good combination.
Is a good combo for you. Yeah.
Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty, forever, said, where does Sissy rank among musician biopic winners for you?
Oh, this is one of the better ones. I think, not just the performance, but the film. A lot of times I get really impatient with biopics, especially when they're like the cradle to grave type biopics, where it's just like, I could have gotten as much reading the Wikipedia entry on this person as watching this film about them.
Totally.
But like, thinking of the winners who would come after, I certainly think she stands above, Rami Malek and Renee Zellweger and Judy. Although I think Judy is an underrated film, but Renee Zellweger is a slightly overrated performance that I don't think she deserved to sweep that entire season the way she did. Because, what I liked about Judy is that it wasn't cradle to grave. It picked a very specific segment of, Judy Garland's life and told that story. And Coal Miner's Daughter also kind of has to do that, because it's only telling part of her story, because her story's not over yet. So yeah, I think certainly stands up certainly to as one of the better music biopic wins. Certainly one of the best regarded.
Definitely better than all the ones that you listed, and even Jamie Foxx too. I think she's a little bit maybe better than Jamie Foxx. Which he's great, but I don't know. I haven't seen Ray in a while, so I can't fully say right now. But I think probably below Marion Cotillard, because that's one of my favorites. But yeah, pretty high. Kareem Balak said, of the actresses that won for portraying musicians, who do you think gave the best singing performance? Spacek, Witherspoon, or Streisand? Well, easily Streisand for me, because, it's a tour de force for Funny Girl.
Funny Girl is actually another one of my blind spots. I have not seen Funny Girl.
Oh dear. Okay.
Yes, well, I know. I'm sorry.
Move it to the top of the list.
Yeah. I'll see myself out.
Yes. Well, it's been fun.
I would have to vote for. I have not seen Funny Girl. I'd still vote for Barbara Streisand, because she's Barbara Streisand.
Correct.
I've heard her "Don't Rain on My Parade." Like, it's
Yeah, that's all you need to hear.
There's no comparison.
She's taking it. Fritz said, how would Susan Hayward have done in a 1950s version of Coal Miner's Daughter? Oh boy. Haven't talked about Susan Hayward in a little bit. Probably would have been quite a bit hammier. I'll say that. And I don't think it would be successful. I think the Southern accent would be not great. So I'll just leave it at that.
And I'll defer to you on that.
Okay. Celluloid Siren said, if Mary had won this year, what year would you have given Sissy the Oscar for, nominated or not?
This is one of those fascinating kind of rewrite history kind of questions. I think if Sissy Spacek does not win, Sissy Spacek does not win for Coal Miner's Daughter, she wins pretty easily for In the Bedroom. And I think that would have been well deserved. Halle Berry in Monsters Ball is a very controversial performance and Oscar win. Yeah. I think it was a deserved Oscar win personally, but yeah, at that point, if Sissy Spacek didn't have an Oscar, you need to give Sissy Spacek an Oscar. So give it to her for In the Bedroom.
Yeah, I think that would have happened. I think this question is asking, like, for us personally, where would we give her a win? I can't think of one personally right now that I would give her a win for, keeping in mind we're still early in Sissy Spacek and me going through Best Actress and everything, so maybe along the way I will decide that. But in terms of her non-nominated performances, would have loved to have seen her nominated for 3 Women right alongside Shelley Duvall. So Gabriel said, thoughts on Spacek exiting towards the front of the stage after her Oscar speech? I thought it was cute. Yeah. Again, charming moment. Definitely seems like something Loretta would have done. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I think we covered that one. That was a really sweet, unassuming moment. You know,
Yes.
it's one of those kind of like Jennifer Lawrence tripping on her dress on her way to the stage. That just
Yeah.
endears them to you a little bit more.
Bruno said, if you can give Sissy Spacek one Best Actress Oscar from her 6 nominations, which one of those would you reward her for and why? I'm going to plead the fifth on that one until we get to In the Bedroom, because I don't want to spoil future episodes.
Let me refresh my memory on what those 6 were, because I don't think I've seen them all. But I would say that probably
First was Carrie.
Carrie.
This.
I've seen Carrie. I've seen this. I've seen In the Bedroom.
Missing.
Don't think I've seen Missing.
Is in 1982. And then Crimes of the Heart is another one. And The River is another one.
I think I've only seen the 3.
Well,
out of those 3, I honestly don't begrudge it to her. Like out of those performances, Coal Miner's Daughter probably stands up for me.
Joey Gentili said, Ellen Burstyn should have won her 2nd Oscar here after The Exorcist, in my opinion. She was very open about how Universal ignored her film in the campaign process for Coal Miner's Daughter and pushed Sissy. Do you think studios pitting the moneymaker versus the performances hurts talent?
I think I do think pitting moneymakers versus performance would be hurtful if this was the case of the better performance not winning. Because
now we said it.
Yeah. I do think and it's no knock on Ellen Burstyn at all. I just think what Sissy is given to do in Coal Miner's Daughter is so much better than what Ellen Burstyn has the opportunity to do with that character in Resurrection. I just don't think there's
well said. I mean, just generally, I think that is a bit of a icky part of awards season sometimes, when studio politics get involved and sometimes certain films just don't have a chance. I think that was a big part of why actors were so invested in the Andrea Riseborough campaign, is that they felt like a movie with a very small studio can't compete with these other movies that have these huge campaigns. So I do think that is still a problem.
Yeah, especially when studios are
this is a great example of that.
Especially when studios are campaigning with against themselves for a particular award.
That's true.
I feel like honestly, like ideally, if you're gonna have 2 leading Best Actress contenders in and you're a studio, it's like push them both. If one of them wins, you win either way. Like just right. Don't pick and choose.
Greg McKellen said, Ellen Burstyn is so friggin' brilliant in Resurrection. Did she stand any chance at all, or was it mainly Sissy versus Mary? I don't think she stood a chance, and a lot of it is probably the distribution problem, but also, she already had an Oscar, and relatively recently.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was a priority.
Already had an Oscar. This feels very much like more of an afterglow kind of nomination, in the sense that you have that halo effect over everything you do for a while. It's such a weird movie to get an Oscar nomination at all. So I think it really was carried by Ellen Burstyn, just her stature.
Mm-hmm. Christoph said, is Private Benjamin the correct film to be Goldie Hawn's only career nomination in lead? If not, which film would be the most apt one to highlight with her only lead nomination?
I mean, it's such an iconic, famous performance, and it's her doing this brand of comedy that feels like it feels right for her. It feels very representative of her.
Yeah, I think it's probably correct. I haven't seen everything she's ever done, but I do think this combines all of her comedic, dramatic skills and just like a movie star charisma. So I cannot be mad at this being her only lead nomination. Kareem Balak said, do you think the brilliantly portrayed emotional coldness of Mary Tyler Moore's character made voters less likely to choose her over the warm and gentle character of Spacek's Loretta Lynn, voting on character sympathies more than on the basis of performance? That's exactly what I laid out before, and kind of sort of not entirely, but it's a factor.
I don't think necessarily that the character is unsympathetic hurt her, because just a few years before this was that Faye Dunaway win, but the way
Louise Fletcher,
like the way I think of it in terms of sympathy at award shows is that like there's the sense that if you play kind of a jerk and you're not sympathetic, you don't have as good a chance of winning. I think there's like a threshold where like if you're playing like a big enough villain or a monster, or like, your Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, or those big grand type of villains, especially if you're playing against type, is when you really can succeed, like your Denzel Washington in Training Day, your Bryan Cranston on TV in Breaking Bad. They're playing these grand villains. The Joker.
Multiple actors. Yeah.
But the fact that Mary Tyler Moore is not only playing a less likable, less huggable character, and also is very subtle about it. It's not an overly showy performance, because the nature of the character is so withdrawn and restrained. That probably didn't help.
Yeah, I think it's more the subtlety of it, more so than the character aspect of it. But I do still think that's a little bit part of it, especially for men who feel certain things about women on screen and being unlikable. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, men in the academy working out their mommy issues, right?
Exactly. Very much so.
Which explains why they gave it to Timothy Hutton and not Mary Tyler Moore, because they maybe relate more to one than the other.
Yeah, who is 100% in the wrong category.
100%.
One of the most egregious examples of category fraud. But Darian Dominique Dion said, "Why is Mary in the leading category?"
I mean, I do think she's a lead in Ordinary People. I think that's like you said, it's a 3-lead movie. I think depending on, like, if you're playing out this Oscar race nowadays, I feel like maybe strategically Mary Tyler Moore gets, or depending on the stature of the actor, like whoever's, like a Mary Tyler Moore, I think is going to be a lead, even if she doesn't have the most screen time. But depending on what the landscape looks like, yeah, I could see this performance being pushed for supporting and winning. Certainly under other circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And leading right into that, both Dark Shaka and Christoph want us to talk about whether if she was campaigned supporting and got in, would she have won?
I haven't seen all of the supporting performances in this category, other than the 2 supporting nominees who are in these films. Given that, like, just from those 2 alone, like, this didn't seem like the most packed necessarily Best Supporting Actress lineup. If you're in the Best Picture winner, I'd say she wins in supporting.
I think she would have won. I really do. Yeah. I don't know if it would be deserving in supporting actress for me necessarily, but I wouldn't have had a problem with it. I think there's been more egregious things,
far worse,
in her very film.
Yes.
So
he has so, like, I didn't have a stopwatch to it, but he clearly has so much more screen time than she does in this film. For
He's
him
the
to be
number
supporting.
1 lead of the movie. Yeah. So Miles McHale said, "Why is this Mary Tyler Moore's only nomination? Where was her career to rival Jessica Lange or Sissy in modern American dramatic film?"
I don't know. Was it just that she was really much more of a TV presence than she was a film presence? I can't think of how many like famous film roles she had.
She didn't have too many more famous film roles after this. I just think she didn't get the opportunities to show her skills like this again. And maybe some of it is just her own personal struggles around this time. Maybe that affected things. But, I mean, she could have had a really incredible run in the 80s, I think. And it's kind of a shame that it didn't happen. Seth Austin Stull said, "Did the idea of back-to-back TV actress winners, Sally's win the prior year, hurt Mary Tyler Moore's chances?" I don't really think so. I just think Sissy was just out in front the whole time. So, I don't know if the TV factor had any impact, but what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it would have either. Just given how far ahead Sissy Spacek was, winning everything else. I don't think that's what hurt Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah. I know that there was some feelings about like film versus TV and like, very concrete camps there around this time.
One of my favorite things about the modern era is how those delineations have kind of disappeared.
Blurred. Yeah.
You've got some of the most prestigious movie stars making some of the most prestigious TV, and vice versa. So I'm glad we're seeing a little bit less of snobbery in terms of like your TV, stay in your lane,
right,
which is unfair because it's all filmed storytelling. So
This is a funny one from Greg Creeman. Who would you rather have as a mother? Margaret White, Margaret White from Carrie, Charlotte Andergast from Autumn Sonata, Eve from Interiors, Beth Jarrett from Ordinary People. Wow.
Oh boy. Oh, boy, can I be an orphan?
I think that's perhaps preferable. Yeah.
I mean, like who picks Carrie's mom? It's been so long
Yeah.
since I've seen Autumn Sonata. I guess I would go with Beth, because at least you've got a cool dad and a therapist.
That's true. You do get to have Donald Sutherland as a father, and who's complaining about that? Yeah, maybe her. I would also say Eve from Interiors. I feel like no matter way you slice it, like there is deep trauma involved, which I don't love, but I feel like with the other three, it's just there's just such this crushing weight of expectation and like such a fraught dynamic. I feel like Interiors has that too, but it seems a little easier to manage. I don't know. Maybe just I would say I would want Ingrid Bergman as a mother and leave it at that. Okay. Lila said, this is an interesting one that I'm very excited to share my answer on. Between the Best Comedy Actress Emmy winners from the last 10 years, who do you think would do the best job in the Mary Tyler Moore role in a possible remake of Ordinary People?
Calling up that list. While I'm doing that, you can give your answer.
Okay. I feel very strongly that the person who would be incredible in a remake of Ordinary People is Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
That's interesting. I'm looking at she's probably a little old for it now. I think who might really kill it is Jean Smart.
Jean Smart would be incredible. Yeah. Would love to see like Catherine O'Hara do that. That would be interesting.
Christopher Guest's remake of Ordinary People starring Catherine O'Hara.
Oh boy. Wow. Well, why not? Fritz said, is Gloria one of the worst movies ever in this category?
No. I mean,
I've seen a lot worse doing this show, let me tell you.
And I haven't even seen as many as you have, and I could name worse.
Yeah.
You'll
even in the modern era.
You'll get to her eventually, but honestly, like one of the worst Best Actress nominations, and nothing against the actress, but like this particular film, The Blind Side. Please, I'll watch Gloria before The Blind Side any day.
Fair, yeah, I would agree. Not a hot take. Let's see. Miles McHale said, why, with several other Dynamite Cassavetes films where she and the film are better, did the Academy pick Gloria? I don't know. I think it's just dependent on the year sometimes, just how things fall.
Yeah, sometimes like, in an actor's career, you'll see like, well, why didn't this performance get in over, when that one did? And it's just the landscape is different every year. Sometimes the category is stronger. Sometimes the category is weaker. It's just harder to break in. It's hard to judge from year to year.
Owen Daly said, given this is the last chance to talk Gena Rowlands on the pod, what other performances she wasn't nominated for do you wish she had been for the most? Opening night, which I've said before, that's the big one. Don't know of any else I would nominate her for, but another great tour de force performance there from Cassavetes' film.
Yeah, Gena Rowlands is another actor who I need to deep dive into her career and just explore more of her work.
Let's get to some fun little miscellaneous questions here, starting with a fun exercise from Andrew Carden, who said, beyond Mary Tyler Moore, cast the other 4 nominees here in roles that won the Best Comedy Actress Emmy.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is interesting. Goldie Hawn. What would she be good in?
I have written down my options here.
You go first, and I will.
Okay. Well, I have Ellen Burstyn as Murphy Brown.
That fits.
Could very easily see it. For Goldie Hawn, I went with Diane from Cheers.
Oh, that would be. That's like really kind of like on the same wavelength there.
Yeah. And like in the same era too. Gena Rowlands was really tough, honestly. because like she's such a great dramatic actress that it's kind of hard to fit her into one of these like sitcoms. I went with Maud from Maud. I don't know how I landed there, but there you go.
Gena Rowlands might have been really good at, because it's one of those comedy Emmy performances that's sort of not comedy. I think Gena Rowlands would have killed Nurse Jackie.
Yes, that's a good one. Or from that same era, United States of Terror.
Yes, absolutely. Sissy Spacek, I'd put in United States of Terror before. I think I.
Oh wow, I love that. I went for Sissy Spacek. I went with Lynette Scavo from Desperate Housewives.
That might be actually where I put Goldie Hawn.
Oh wow.
No, I think you're right. I think Sissy Spacek is fits very well with the Felicity Huffman vibe much more.
Yeah, I think she could play the frustrated aspect of it very well. Really fun question. Did you have other options there?
No, it's hard to think of exactly who would have fit these roles, especially like ages in their careers, like when they would have lined up. So I'm just kind of like trying to think my way through it. It's like thinking Goldie Hawn as Selena Meyer. Does that make sense?
Oh my God.
Honestly, I would watch that. I'd totally watch that.
I would watch that today. Yeah. Yes. Someone greenlight Goldie Hawn in a political comedy. All right. Joey Gentili said Gloria was remade in the 90s with Sharon Stone. Private Benjamin was remade in the 2000s with Jessica Simpson. You're a studio executive. Quick, which one is getting remade next, and with who? I don't think we need another coal miner's daughter. No. Unless it's a sequel.
Unless it's a sequel, yeah. Although if you want to
with
do
Sissy.
Coal Miner's Daughter 2 with Sissy, I'm here for it. 100%.
Yeah. Ordinary People, I don't want to be remade, so let's leave it at that. I mean, I think Resurrection, like we were sort of saying, would be an interesting remake too.
Yeah, Resurrection.
And I would want to do it with like a great character actress, like a Hong Chow maybe. Something like that.
That'd be good. I would love to see, like, Resurrection is one of those films where the premise is so interesting that I think if you just execute it a little better, focus on different things, like cut out the Sam Shepard relationship and really focus on grief, faith, those sorts of questions much more.
Juan Carlos Ojano said, this does feel like a atypical lineup, save for Spacek and more, in terms of genre. So I'm curious to who do you think was in 6th place? So just missed out. I would guess Nastasia Kinski from Tess, which is a Best Picture nominee and wins 3 Oscars, would be my guess, as the titular Tess. I mean, like, Dolly Parton was cited at the time for 9 to 5. That would have been a very fun nomination.
It's hard to imagine Dolly Parton in 9 to 5 and Goldie Hawn and Private Benjamin in the same lineup. Usually they only will give that broad comedy like that one slot.
You get one.
Yeah.
And Christoph said Tess got 6 nominations, including picture and director, and 3 wins. So how did Nastasia Kinski miss a nomination? Good question. I do think it is surprising in hindsight, considering it did pretty well. Maybe she just wasn't taken seriously for being young and like she was a former model. I don't know. I know sometimes that doesn't stop them with younger women, but this is just a lineup full of heavy hitters. So,
and sometimes, like, especially if you're coming from a field where you're known for your beauty, like it takes it takes a couple of roles for you to build up that cred with the Oscars. I think of Charlize Theron had to pay a couple of dues before they she made it in for Monster. I had another example and it just flew out of my head. Catherine Zeta-Jones. I felt like because she was cast so much for her beauty, like in like The Mask of Zorro, and so she needed traffic before they took her seriously enough for Chicago.
Joey Gentili said, recast these 80s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Karen Black, Pauline Collins, Amy Irving, Lindsay Krause, and Susan Sarandon.
Okay, let's start with Susan Sarandon. Where do I think Susan Sarandon would have fit? Susan Sarandon would have been good Gloria.
Yes, I could very easily see that. but she could do like Ordinary People, maybe.
Yeah. Lindsay Krause could also fit Gloria. I'd go Amy Irving for probably Coal Miners.
Yeah, that makes sense. Pauline Collins in Resurrection makes sense. I mean, Karen Black would be fun in Gloria, too. Would love to see it. Geo said, in this, the first year of the Razzies, Shelley Duvall received a nomination for Worst Actress for her role in The Shining, although this nomination has since been revoked. Looking back on this year, do you think she should have a Best Actress Oscar nomination instead?
I'm gonna say no. I'm
rude.
I don't I don't think I would have put her in the Razzies. But like I did finally catch up on The Shining just a couple of years ago, finally. I don't think she's good at it.
Wow.
I'm sorry, Shelley. I know she was when she terrorized on that set.
She sure was.
Yeah, so like I don't blame her at all for it. So I don't hold anything against her for that film. I just don't think it was a particularly successful performance, personally. I'll see myself out of it.
Okay, well, I think that Razzie nomination should not have happened. I would have been happy with a nomination at the Oscars for her just because she could have been Oscar nominee Shelley Duvall, and that would have been nice for historical purposes. I don't think she would have made my personal lineup necessarily, but yeah, I mean, she deserved better, just generally, including for Three Women, like I've mentioned multiple times already. All right, and then last one from Ayrton O'Brien. Catherine Deneuve was in a Best Foreign Film nominee this year, The Last Metro, and for Truffaut, who they loved and clearly had a noticeable career. Why not this film for her only nomination instead of Indochine?
I'm gonna defer to you on this one. I have not seen this particular film of hers.
I'm not sure. All I can say is there was a lot of, again, like big time Hollywood stars in the mix this year. She also didn't really materialize with precursors outside of winning the César Award, which is a big deal, but doesn't always line up with Oscars, as we know. So I think sometimes the more international potential nominees tend to need a critic's push, and she didn't get that. So with that, let's get to our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Daniel, who do you think it was?
I mean, it's hard not to say Mary Tyler Moore. I mean, she was in the Best Picture winner. You know, she playing against type. They clearly, you know, obviously they liked the film. They gave it Best Picture. So I, you know, the only other Best Picture nominee in this category besides Coal Miner's Daughter, it's hard for me to say that it's not Mary Tyler Moore. I gotta go with her.
I could definitely see Goldie Hawn having a little bit of support, especially like from her Hollywood friends. I think could definitely put their weight behind her. But yeah, I think Mary Tyler Moore was clearly the one here and pushed as a more dramatic, heavier alternative to Coal Miner's Daughter and Sissy Spacek.
Yeah, so, and it's one of those classic cases where you do get that duality from the Golden Globes of, you know, you pit the comedy musical winner against the drama winner, which we've seen happen so many times, you know, Reese Witherspoon versus Felicity Huffman, or Gwyneth Paltrow versus Kate Blanchett
and Michelle Yeoh.
Or Kate Blanchett and Michelle Yeoh. Yeah, Kate Blanchett's happened a couple times.
Yeah, so final question for you. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
My personal choice from this lineup actually probably would have been Sissy. You know, I think Ordinary People is the best film in this category, but a lot of what Mary Tyler Moore is doing in that film is so, you know, the writing and the direction and the performance of her co-stars is contributing just as much. You know, which is not to say I know you're going to pick Mary Tyler Moore, so I'm not going to like denigrate her performance.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, it's not you know, trying to find reasons not to give it to Mary Tyler Moore, I feel like is unfair. I just feel like Sissy Spacek, what she's given to do in Coal Miner's Daughter, and considering her film career as a whole, just looking back at these performances, yeah, I'd give it to Sissy probably.
I respect it. I would have gone for Mary Tyler Moore here. She would definitely be getting my vote from this lineup, even though I think Sissy is great, Goldie is great. So, you know, it's not like a total blowout, But I do just find myself going back to that performance from Mary Tyler Moore very often, especially when I think about Ordinary People. And for as much as it is Conrad's story, I think my heart is with the Beth character. And just, I hope she's okay wherever she is out there.
Yeah, and
you
that's
know?
that's one of the testaments to her performance in this.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, she can behave the way she does towards her family, and you still kind of hope she's okay, because
Yes,
you could tell
exactly.
how much of that comes from pain and grief, and you know, not so much you know, like just a cruel withholding of affection, but just an inability to understand how to human under those circumstances.
Yeah.
She's just ill-equipped.
Yeah. So it's something that really affects me. It's something that I've seen in my own life. And so I feel like I just have this like personal draw to that performance and that character that, yeah, I would have picked her. But you know what? I think history is fine with how things worked out, and Mary Tyler Moore got to prove herself to show that she isn't just like the sunny comedic star of TV, that she had the range, as it were, to pull off both. And she didn't need an Oscar for it, but it's beautiful work regardless of awards. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a wonderful, I think, season premiere to kick off the 80s. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I admit to all of your listeners, if they're yelling at me for any reason, like I am, you know, coming to a lot of these films fresh. So I was excited to be able to talk about them for the first time, because I hadn't seen most of these films. So I hope your listeners are happy with me and that you'll invite me back.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting way to even approach, you know, a category like this, is to not having seen them all, or maybe having seen one way back that you can't really remember it. It feels like you're approaching it like a voter would in 1980, essentially. So anyway, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Well, you can find my Twitter account at Dan_something. I can say you can find my account there because I haven't contributed to it very often lately. I would say in terms of film, I am on Letterboxd as O Danny Boy on Letterboxd. ODANNYBOY. So you can find me there talking about whatever I've seen. And yeah, that's primarily where I'm most active these days, talking about movies.
And also goldderby.com.
And also on goldderby.com.
There's
I
also
almost
that.
forgot my place of work. Oh, no one who works with me listen to this. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Yes, goldderby.com,
Yeah, anyway.
goldderby.com. Visit goldderby.com. Make your predictions now at goldderby.com.
Wow. You just incepted the viewers or listeners. Whatever. It's late. All right. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find me at Kevin_Jacobson on Twitter, and the show's at Oscar Runner Up. Instagram at And the Runner Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard, go to patreon.com/And the Runner Up is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. Next week, we'll be discussing the Best Actress lineup of 1981, where the nominees were Katharine Hepburn in On Golden Pond, Diane Keaton in Reds, Marsha Mason in Only When I Laugh, Susan Sarandon in Atlantic City, and, drumroll please, Meryl Streep in The French Lieutenant's Woman. Our first Meryl is coming, with the winner being Katharine Hepburn. So with that, thanks again, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
And I will bid you all adieu.